The young woman smiled sweetly and inclined her head, though her eyes never seemed to leave Rob's. Your Grace is too kind. I am overjoyed that House Tyrell will be joining House Stark in these dark times. Gods be good. Even the voice is melodious. She is something out of a dream. Rob shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. Get a grip on yourself. You're supposed to be a king. Not at all, my lady. To have allies like the staunch men of the Reach is something we deeply desire. Deeply desire. Others take me, I'm prattling like a small boy. Margaery didn't appear to notice the apparent failure of Rob's wits. She merely gestured to the men around her. The Knights of the Reach are said to be without compare, your Grace, and yet on our journey we heard nothing but tales of the young wolf and his victories over the old Lion of Lannister. A small cheer went up from the Northmen and River Lords. Margaery regarded them all with a bright smile. After the cheering abated, she went on. Your renown is now becoming so great that we are even hearing of your prowess in Highgarden. Rob knew that was ridiculous, but he felt his chest swell with a certain sense of pride even so. Forgive me, my lady, but I am given to wonder why you made the perilous journey with your brother. Margaery eyed him mischievously. With the men of the Reach and the North with me I had nothing to fear, your Grace. It was not dangerous in the least. Laughter rang out across the great hall. Again Margaery smiled. In truth, your Grace, I desired to travel to the Riverlands to meet you and your lords. I am somewhat ashamed that the Reach has remained idle while the realm is at war. When I heard that we were to try and join your efforts, I knew I had no choice but to join the party headed north. I wanted to show you that not all Tyrells are sleeping flowers. Well put, my lady. It is time to end this before the crowd realizes that I can barely form more than a few words together. As I mentioned to your brother, we will be having a feast later to celebrate both our recent victory and our new alliance. It would honor me if you both could join me at the high table. Garlan and Margaery Tyrell both bowed and curtsied deeply. It would be an honor, your Grace. Garlan said respectfully. And a pleasure, your Grace. Margaery added, her smile widening. Rob could only nod at the pair. It is going to be an interesting evening. Chapter 15, Margaery I. Chapter text. The feast was in full swing. Servants carried food to and from the kitchens and kept the goblets flowing with wine. Musicians played joyful song to the side of the room, adding to the mood of celebration that filled the hall. She sat at the high table next to her brother and to the left of the king. Apparently it was an expected Stark custom that a different person would be invited to the high table at each meal to discuss matters with the High Lord. Be it a lord or servant, all had, in turn, been invited to take a seat next to the Stark of Winterfell to talk about a range of matters with their master. This tradition had been started with Rob's father, Eddard Stark, and it was one that continued now. Even though Lord Stark's son was now a king. It was a singular honor for the invited guest and a way of apprising a lord of what was transpiring in his domain. The South could learn a lot from this custom. It is no coincidence that Eddard Stark seems to be universally loved by his people. Such loyalty is beyond price, and it seems the Starks have it in abundance. Margaery approved of this tradition, not least because she was currently benefiting from it. By such an invitation she and her brother had managed to mingle with the Stark and Tully families, along with a few principal bannermen, without it seeming improper or distasteful. It is a good start, but there is more to do. She was wearing a pale green dress, made of the finest silk, with a rose motif woven throughout. There were hints of grey and blue in the fabric, enough to suggest a loyalty to the Tyrell's new liege lords. The dress had a plunging neckline, but she covered this to a degree by wearing her golden rose pendant, a gift from her grandmother. While the dress would seem a little dull in Highgarden, being somewhat plain and far less flamboyant than her usual social attire, it was perfect for the north. Margaery had correctly guessed that her usual feast dresses would have looked gaudy in such surroundings. Her only concern was that she would be cold. She needed to be comfortable and easygoing in front of the Starks, not shivering. Thankfully the roaring hearths and multitudes of revelers served to keep her warm. In keeping with her mindset, she had chosen to mix her hairstyle with a combination of the southern and northern style. The majority of her hair was held up by elaborate pins, while the rest she allowed to tumble past her almost bare shoulders. Her aim was to be eye-catching without seeming attention-seeking. It seems to be working as well. The young wolf has barely kept his eyes off me since I entered the hall. She leaned over and spoke to Garland her brother in a quiet tone. Did you manage to get a raven off to father before the feast? Garland sipped ale from a goblet. Yes indeed, sweet sister. I sent one letter by raven and another by horse just to be sure. And, as you requested, I had the Riverrun Maester write the letters for me. No doubt by now the king knows all about how warmly we have been received and how grateful we are that we have been welcomed into his service. Margaery lowered her tone still further. You sound unhappy with the prospect. Her brother turned to face her with a look of surprise, though he kept a smile on his face. Not at all, little sister, these are good people. I have spent several days mingling with the folk here at the castle. The Starks and Tullys are loved by their people and genuinely seem to care about those around them. What I am unhappy with is the scheming. I am a warrior Margaery, tell me to duel a foe or take a castle and I am in my element. This politicking is for the Tyrell women, and maybe Wylus. Well that was true. With the exception of her eldest brother, the Tyrell men seemed to be singularly lacking in guile. Though, Garland had played the part Margaery had set him well. He has spent a lot of time over the last week with the people of Riverrun, charming them with his grace and lack of airs. He had also won over the knights and squires in the tiltyard by sparring with multiple opponents and impressing them with his fighting prowess. Margaery smiled to herself. Of course, the Northmen are warriors, it takes someone like them to impress, and no one fights quite like Garland. She herself, of course, had been anything but idle. She had devoted the intervening time between her arrival at Riverrun and Robb's return to learning all she could about the region and its people. Margaery had spent hours talking to Catelyn Stark and Myra Forrester, finding out as much as she could about the North and Riverlands. In truth she already knew a great deal, but it never hurt to have fresh knowledge. Poor Myra, she was exhausted from the constant conversation. I doubt she has spoken so much since she arrived in Highgarden. Still, Margaery had rewarded the young girl. The night before they arrived at Riverrun she has summoned the young girl to her chambers in the inn they were staying in. Myra, I wish to let you know of a decision I have made. My lady. The girl had hung her head, the better to hide the look of anxiety crossed her face. She no doubt fears that seeing as how we've neared our destination I intend to discharge her from my service. She probably fears she's no longer of use and will be sent home in shame. I wish to promote you, Myra. You have been a good and loyal servant to me and I intend to reward you. From now on you are my principal handmaiden. You will be in charge of all my domestic affairs. My lady. Myra could not keep the shock from her voice. She curtsied deeply. I am not worthy of the honor. Nonsense. Margaery said sternly but with a smile. You are extremely capable. More so than your current duties allow. Myra's mouth opened and closed but no sound came out. You know where we are headed, Myra, this is your homelands and I am unfamiliar with the customs and the people. If the alliance between our realms is to succeed, and is my fervent wish that they do, I will have more need of you than ever. Thank you, my lady. Myra had breathed, joy mixing with relief in her voice. Myra stood behind Margaery now, attending her every need and making sure only the finest food reached her lady's plate. She was careful though not to appear haughty and offend their hosts. A sweet girl with a good head on her shoulders. She will go very far. Is the food to your liking, my lady? She stirred from her thoughts and looked to her right. Robb Stark, with his crown in place and dressed in his finest clothes, had spoken to her. My, his eyes are startling up close. Deep blue seas of warmth and kindness. It is indeed your grace. She leaned over and put a hand on his arm. Smiling brightly she said. Thank you again for inviting us to dine with you. Robb's face reddened at her touch. It is the least we could do for our new allies. Not allies, your grace, your humble vassals. We are here to serve you. Ah well, Robb seemed to struggle with his words. It is an honor to have you. I mean, receive you. Margaery's face went solemn, ignoring his jumbled words. Not at all, your grace, the honor is ours, to serve a king worthy of the name and restore the realm to peace is all we desire. At the mention of the word desire Robb coughed slightly and quickly reached for his goblet. He drank deeply. Margaery took the opportunity to look around the hall. She noticed that every so often people made subtle glances at the high table. in particular at her and Rob. Good, let them look. Let them get used to seeing me beside the king. Margaery glanced down the table. Edmure Tully was well in his cups, his face flushed from drink. She had heard that Lord Hoster Tully was soon to leave this world, and she could imagine he was using ale to forget his woes. He was sharing a jest with the great Jon, who was booming with laughter. To Rob's other side, Catelyn and Daisy Mormont were engaged in polite conversation, though Margaery could not make out what the topic of conversation was. Garland was in a hushed discussion with one of the many Freys that seemed to be legion within the army. She turned to regard the king. Her initial impression of him had been very positive. She had watched from the back of the hall as Rob had been crowned, and watched as he had dealt with the steady stream of petitioners who had come before him. What particularly struck her was the way Rob dealt with everyone equally, giving as much attention to the small folk as he did the High Lords. Garland had also reported that the young wolf was well liked by the soldiers, who regarded him almost as a legend. Up until recent events, Tywin Lannister had been seen as the foremost military strategist of the age, having cultivated a reputation for pragmatism and ruthlessness. Now that reputation was in tatters, with Robb Stark outmaneuvering him at every turn. Furthermore, the Kingslayer, said to be the finest swordsman in the realm, beaten only perhaps by Sir Barristan Selmy, had been captured by Robb's men. By Robb himself, if you believed the tales. Having ventured outside the castle walls and spoken to the small folk, Margaery realized that the reputation Robb was creating held true. The people of Riverrun believed themselves to be doomed when the Lannisters had invaded. The invading army had brushed aside any resistance the Riverlanders could offer, and were soon before the very gates of Riverrun itself. The people had resigned themselves to a siege and then, most likely, death or servitude. Robb Stark had saved them. He had come out of the darkness and savaged the Lannisters like a wolf among sheep. More than that, the king led from the front, taking the same risks as his men. The people adored him. Grandmother was right, for one so young he has done very well. It seemed Eddard Stark taught his son well. Margaery tilted her head, the better to get a look at the king. Robb had sat back in a chair nursing a goblet. As she looked, he saw him glance at her and then quickly look away, feigning interest in the musicians who continued to play. For a great warrior with the courage to take on the throne, he is incredibly shy among women. "Do you like the music, Your Grace?" she asked, attempting to pull back the veil of awkwardness between them that seemed to have descended between them. Robb turned her way. "Very much so, Your Grace. I fear though that our meager food and entertainment is a poor substitute for what you and your brother must be used to in Highgarden." She considered. "It is different, certainly. Though nowhere near as ostentatious. In any event, a feast has more vital components that are far more important." "Oh?" Robb asked with a querying look. "And those are?" "Why, Your Grace," Margaery said, a little loudly. "Good food, drink and company. Here. Here." Lord Edmure cried, banging his fist on the table. "A toast to the Rose of Highgarden." As one, the high table, along with the rest of the hall, stood and toasted the Rose of Highgarden, before draining their goblets. As they resumed their seats, Robb leaned over to her. "It seems you are most popular with the people, my lady." Margaery gave him a sly grin. She beckoned him in closer and then whispered, "It's easy to be popular during feasts, Your Grace. I provided the wine." Robb laughed at the jest. Margaery watched as his face lit up. For a brief moment she saw the man behind the crown, unencumbered with the weighty responsibility thrust upon him. She saw youth and a sense of confidence within him. The king abruptly stood. He pushed back his chair and offered her his hand. "Would you care to dance, my lady?" Margaery had long been trained not to show shock in social situations. Even so, it took all that training to stop her mouth from dropping open. Not once would she have considered this shy boy from Winterfell of being capable of dancing, much less invite a woman to do so in such a grand setting. "He can barely speak to me, yet he thinks to dance." Still, she had no choice. One does not refuse an invitation from a king. She placed her small hand in the king's and allowed him to help her from her seat. They walked away from the table and towards the center of the hall, where a large space had been left clear. "Gods, what has he got us into? Is he attempting to impress me by trying to imitate the courts of the South? The maiden knows what kind of skills he has. He was raised in the cold hard North. Even so, as they walked slowly to the center of the room, Margaery felt herself drawn to the king's eyes. He stared at her unblinking with a wide smile on his face. She felt a chill go through her as she looked into those eyes. She felt rather than saw the gaze of the crowd on them both. She was used to being the center of attention, but she felt a jolt of fear that she might be made a fool of in front of these people who she had only just met. However, the blue soulful eyes of the king bore into hers, conveying warmth and safety. Margaery returned the look and allowed herself a small smile. "Very well, your grace, if you wish to be bold, I'm happy to oblige. If you embarrass us, you'll have no one to blame but yourself." Robb nodded to the musicians, who quickly struck up a slower beat of music, the start of a well-known dancing song heard throughout the Seven Kingdoms. The king offered her a short bow. Margaery curtsied in response. She half expected to have to lead or at least offer encouragement, but before she could think, Robb had pulled her gently into an embrace. His right hand clasped her left, and his left went round her back, holding her close. Automatically Margaery allowed her left hand to settle on Robb's right arm, the proper pose for such a dance. And then they were off, gliding across the floor as gracefully as a swan moves through water. Their bodies moving in perfect time with the beat of the music. As the song increased in tempo, the dancers matched it, pirouetting as the music dictated. Margaery was astounded. Every move she made, she found the king could equal, taking any variation in stride. He was lithe, balanced and possessed natural rhythm. Their eyes seemed locked on one another, and the rest of the world seemed to fall away. There was nothing but them and the music. She could feel herself becoming lost in the eyes that gazed at her. She found herself examining the young face around it. The king's lips were drawn into a smile that was kind and sure. Gone was the shyness and clumsiness she had witnessed earlier. Robb held her with confidence, moving her gently but with firm assurance. From the feel of the fabric she could tell that his arm was muscled, and her mind briefly considered what the rest of him was like. The feeling was unsettling but thrilling. In a moment, too few moment for her taste, the music began to slow and then stop. Robb pulled back, still holding her hand. He turned to smile and bow to the crowd. It was only then that she realized that the entire hall was on their feet clapping. She had been lost in the intensity of the dance and forgotten that they were surrounded by people. She quickly executed a curtsy, finding that her smile was entirely natural. Robb then turned back to face her. As the pair bowed and curtsied to each other, the king slowly lowered his lips to her hand, which he still held. He briefly grazed the back of her hand with a lingering kiss, his eyes never leaving hers. "My lady," he said, his tone conveying his admiration. They walked around Riverrun's battlements. Robb had dismissed his guards, saying that he was safe within the walls of his grandfather's keep. Margaery suspected this might be a pretext to spend some time alone with her. She had no objection. The night air was cold and it was windy as they walked up high. After a particularly harsh gust of wind sent a shudder through her, Robb pulled his cloak from his shoulders and settled it around Margaery's own. It was warm and smelled of earth and musk. She found she liked the smell. They were still slightly breathless and flushed from the wine. As she pulled in closer to the king, she took the opportunity to thread her arm through his. "Where did you learn to do that?" she asked. Robb said seriously. "Oh, I take my cloak off on a daily basis. It has always been insisted upon that I dress and undress myself. My parents were very cruel." "No." She lightly smacked his arm at the jest. "Witty as well as elegant. I meant the dancing, your grace." He turned to face her, using his hand to raise her chin so their eyes met. "When we're alone, it's Robb, not your grace. I am just a man, my lady. And quite a man at that." "In that case, Robb, you must call me Margaery." "We shall see, my lady." Margaery smiled in spite of herself. It felt like she was losing control of the situation, and yet she did not find this alarming. She was used to her beauty having a bewildering effect on men, and indeed this had seemed to be the case where Robb was concerned when they first met, but he seemed to have rallied over the course of the feast. Perhaps it was the wine. "I should have known better than to try and instruct a king," she said reproachfully as they continued their walk. Robb chuckled. "As my maester will tell you, I am quite useless at taking instruction." "Clearly not," Margaery said slyly as she pulled closer to him. "After all, Someone must have taught you to dance. That was my mother's doing. Rob smiled at the memory. She was determined that her children would not belong solely to the North. So from an early age she insisted that if we were to learn how to wield a sword and command armies, we were also to learn the traditions of the South, including how to dance. I'm sure the young wolf must have loved that. Margaery teased. I detested it at first. Rob nodded. It was girly, and I felt the men of Winterfell must be mocking me behind their backs. But then I found it required the same balance and poise as using a sword. After that there was no stopping me. Well, if they are similar, then I'm sure we could have quite a match at the tilt-yard. Rob laughed. My lady, I am sure you are equal to anything you put your mind to. He is quite charming when he's had some wine and not feeling so anxious. I imagine your sisters loved learning to dance. Sansa, yes, she was always obsessed with being a proper lady. Arya, not so much, she is far too wild and determined to allow someone else to lead her in a dance. A girl after my own heart. She saw that Rob had become solemn, he had turned his head away from her, the better to hide his feelings. Margaery stepped in and turned the king to face her. You must miss them both a great deal. Rob nodded sadly. Not just them, but my father as well. I started this war to get them back from the Lannisters. Then we're told they are free, and since then they've disappeared. We don't know if they are alive or dead. It's maddening. Margaery was struck by the honesty. He has no guile. No Southorn lord would be so open of his feelings to a stranger. And yet, what has he said that's so terrible, that he loves and misses his family? It must be terrible. She consoled. But then you must remember that the Lannisters started this war. You didn't start this fight. But I will finish it. Rob finished firmly. The sadness that had gripped his face was gone and he looked coldly at her. Margaery stared at his face. There is the young wolf, the king in the north. You are quite fearsome, your grace. She said, falling back onto her well-rehearsed courtesies. Only to my enemies, my lady. Rob said with a grim smile. He sighed. In truth, I hate war and fighting. Just like Lady Stark told me his father was like. For someone who hates fighting, you seem to be incredibly proficient at it. She noted, smiling. It was said in good humor, but she desperately wanted to know what kind of man was in front of her. Would he break before a challenge or rise and triumph? Oh, I've won some battles. Rob conceded. But the war is not yet done, and will not be done until the Lannisters no longer hold the Iron Throne. I was given to understand you have no interest in the Iron Throne. Margaery said, probing. I have no interest in thrones at all. Rob said earnestly. All I want is independence for the North and Riverlands. The Vale as well, if they would but join us. What about House Tyrell? What of us? What of me? Before she could speak, the king continued. But things have changed. Changed today, in fact. How so? Margaery kept her voice light, but inside her heart beat faster. So much depends on his next few words. The Reach declaring for me changes the situation dramatically. Rob said, as if stating the weather. In what way, your grace? Margaery listening intently. Your father joining our cause means that I have accepted the Reach as one of our own. I can no longer consider a straight split of the Seven Kingdoms. He paused, mulling it over. By pledging allegiance to the North, you have made yourselves outlaws to the Iron Throne. There is now no option. There will be no peace until the Lannisters are brought low. By the gods, he is so certain of his decision. Surely this can't be because of me. Would your men support such an endeavor? Would they fight for the Reach? She could feel she was holding her breath. The king turned to her. If they refuse, then I shall fight by myself. You have pledged allegiance to me. The duty of a leader is to protect his people. Honor demands no less. Margaery felt the breath rush from her. She felt unsteady. All her time in Highgarden had not prepared her for a man like this. Renly would certainly never have been like this. He may be young and inexperienced, but there was a core of Valyrian steel at his heart that was unyielding. But they will not refuse. Rob said. The Northmen love to fight, and the Lannisters will never be forgiven for imprisoning my father and accusing him of treason. Little did Queen Circea know how that would rile the North. We went to war once to remove a tyrant from the throne. We will do so again. They walked in silence for a moment, each processing their own thoughts. But what of you, my lady? Robb asked. Me, your grace. Margaery required, her face all innocence. Why did you travel all the way up here? Please do not tell me it was from a sense of shame at your family's inaction. Any impression of such would have been washed away with your brother arriving here with 500 troops. Smarter than I thought, Robb Stark. You are correct, your grace. Margaery allowed. But if I stayed in Highgarden, it was likely that my father would have married me to a noble lord to secure an alliance. Yes. Robb mused. My mother tells me you were betrothed to Renly Baratheon. She could see the king glance sideways at her, trying to gauge her reaction. I must be careful here. Only for a few days. Margaery said airily. I had never met the man before he arrived in Highgarden claiming to be king. My father was confused. He is not the brightest of men, but he so wanted to fight the Lannisters. He was outraged by what happened to your father. Really? Robb's voice was thick with disbelief. He looked at her searchingly. Oh, yes. Margaery said, pulling round to face the king once more. Father would often recount how Lord Eddard lifted the siege of Storm's End. He arrived on the scene with a battle-hardened army to find my father's forces unprepared. They had done nothing but eat and laze about for the better part of a year. Soft and decadent as Lord Tarly tells it. Your father could have attacked, but instead he offered peace and did not punish House Tyrell for taking the wrong side in the war. Father says that Lord Eddard and Lord Stannis had quite an argument about it. My father was always saying how merciful your father was that day. Robb nodded sadly, no doubt remembering his father. When Renly arrived, Margaery went on. My father saw the chance to try to rescue Lord Eddard. To repay him for his kindness. He knew Stannis Baratheon still hated our house and would never forgive us for siding with the Mad King, so when Renly arrived it looked like a gift from the gods. She lowered her head, tears coming from her eyes. Then it all went wrong. Renly declared himself king. Robb's face as a mask. Renly had no right to claim the throne. He said grimly. Her eyes widened. I know, your grace, she said glumly. It was wanton folly and ambition. But it caught the imagination of the men, and next thing I know, I am betrothed, to be used as nothing more than a means to seal an alliance. You did not want to marry Lord Renly. To make yourself a queen? Robb enquired, his face hardened with suspicion. I did not know him, your grace. Margaery's face was wet with tears. I was commanded by my father to marry him. I am just a woman, a daughter of a noble house. I had to obey. She wiped some of the tears away. He seemed kind and good-natured. I could have done worse. Robb reached up to her face and brushed the rest of her tears from her face. Hush, my lady, it is all right. Margaery's hands reached up to his, holding them to the sides of her face. They now looked straight at each other. But there were some of us who always objected to Renly. Who knew that he had no right to the throne. That he was doing the right thing but for the wrong reasons. She saw the king swallow deeply. Is that why your father locked him up? Margaery gave a short laugh. She briefly nuzzled her face into his hand. In truth, it was my grandmother who did that. She wanted to bring my father to his senses. I am glad she did. Robb said earnestly. Otherwise you would not be here. Margaery brought Robb's hand down until they were clasped in hers as she stared at him. I am glad I'm here as well, your grace. Holding hands, they walked towards a stone staircase and descended to the castle courtyard. They crossed the ground and neared the stables and animal pens. So what have you told your father about your reason for coming here? Robb asked. Well, officially, I am here to get to know you so that I can report back what kind of man you are, what kind of king I think you to be. My father may make mistakes, but he is smart enough not to make the same one twice. Margaery smiled, the tears almost gone. Ah, and what have you discovered so far? Careful, this is not a man who is susceptible to base flattery. Your people admire you, your grace. They see you as an honorable man. Robb nodded, seemingly pleased. But that is what others think of me. What are your impressions? Margaery leaned in and whispered into his ear. I know you can dance, your grace. The king laughed loudly, startling the hunting dogs and horses. The furthest pen seemed to shake loudly, the door almost coming off its hinges. Well, that is a start, I suppose. Robb smiled openly at her. But if you really want to meet the real me, then I should introduce you to someone. Margaery stopped. The pen ahead was shaking as if something inside was throwing itself against the walls in an attempt to escape. There was growling and scratching. Robb took a key from a peg mounted on the wall and turned to her. He can smell us, my lady. He's just a bit excited. He's been locked up for a while and it makes him restive. Be calm and stay close. Margaery welcomed the invitation to be close to the king, but even so she felt fear tingle down her spine. What has he got in there? It sounds like a monster. Her throat was dry as she pulled as close as she could to Robb. She could feel his heartbeat, strong and vibrant. She wished she could just hold here for a moment. Robb reached forward and put the key in the lock of the pen door. As soon as he turned it, the door smashed open, narrowly missing them as Robb pulled them out of harm's way. Margaery made out a blur as it raced past them. She felt, rather than saw, something pass her back. Gods, it's huge. Then it was in front of them. A massive wolf, unlike any creature Margaery had ever seen before. It was easily as tall as her hips. If it had stood on its hind legs, then it would have been taller than her. The sounds it made were deafening. The creature snarled at her and sniffed at her feet. Margaery froze and clung to Robb, petrified of the creature in front of her. Robb embraced her gently. He whispered in her ear. Do not be afraid. He is just trying to figure you out. The king chuckled. In that way he is not so different from me. She could not speak. The creature was terrifying. Robb leaned forward to stroke the animal's head softly. He rubbed behind the ears and tickled under the chin. The creature whined gently. What? What is it? Margaery whispered, not wanting to gain the beast's attention. This, Robb said with pride, is a direwolf. His name is Greywind. He has been with me for the last few years. He's enormous. Margaery said, not able to think of anything else to say. Direwolves often are. Robb allowed, his smile widening. Touch him. Margaery looked open-mouthed at the king. Touch him. Yes, indeed. He is quite like a dog or horse. You have to show no fear and offer your respect. He needs to smell you. Offer him your hand, you have nothing to fear with me beside you. Greywind will only attack at my command or if I am in danger. Margaery tentatively put her hand out, palm down, as she would if she was receiving the attentions of a courtier. Greywind sniffed the palm for a moment and then looked up into her face. It's like it can see into my soul. The direwolf's face twisted from side to side as if thinking something over. Then it reached forward and licked her hand. He likes you. Robb said firmly. I don't know why, but I feel I have just passed some kind of test. Chapter 16, Cersei 3. Chapter text. She paced the room, her mind racing. The stunted little fool, how could he allow this to happen? Peasants rioting in the streets of King's Landing. Killing and raping their betters. Cersei strode to her balcony. Even though there was a great distance between her chamber in Maegor's Holdfast and the city street below, she could hear the sounds of hundreds of small folk rampaging back and forth, screaming for food and relief from their woes. The bells from the Great September of Baelor rang out across the city, warning of danger and discord. Would that they could ring louder and drown out the sounds of the ignorant rabble. This could not be borne. Her dwarf brother was clearly inept and would have to be removed. The guards would have to be ordered onto the streets. Tough punishment meted out to those offenders who had dared disrupt the natural order of things. Cersei gripped the railing of her balcony, looking down on the city below. I have no choice now. Father was a fool to think that Tyrion could handle this responsibility. Once again it falls to me to sort out the mess the Lannister men make of things. She walked back inside her chamber and poured herself a goblet of wine from a waiting pitcher. She drained the goblet in one swallow and then poured herself another. The wine was strong and she suddenly felt a lightness settle over her. Anything to dull this frightful headache. The day had been a nightmare made real for Cersei to begin with. Her brother, in his wisdom, had decided that the crown needed an alliance with Dorne, who had so far no declared themselves in the war. To better create such an alliance, Tyrion had negotiated that Myrcella, Cersei's only daughter, would be betrothed to Tystane Martell, the son of the region's ruling prince, Doran. Naturally, Doran had insisted that Myrcella travel to Dorne to be with her betrothed, and like a shameless toady, Tyrion had agreed. Cersei had been beside herself. You would trade a princess of the Seven Kingdoms for Dorne? Her brother had looked at her for a long moment, his mismatched eyes staring into hers. She is a princess. One could argue that her purpose is to be traded for alliances. No. Cersei's eyes blazed. She will not be sent off like some broodmare. My daughter will not be sold like I was. Her mind flashed back to the moment when she realized she was to marry a king and become joint ruler of the Seven Kingdoms. I was so happy then. I was too young to remember. Tyrion said, with an air of disinterest. But I can't imagine you objected to being married to Robert Baratheon. I was being sold off by father. Cersei seethed, ignoring the jibe. To buy a kingdom. My daughter will not suffer such a fate. I agree. Tyrion nodded, though his expression conveyed his disbelief at her words. He smiled suddenly. If anything, she is being sold off to buy the security of the kingdom. By securing the loyalty of one rather than the whole seven. It seems the next generation is being devalued. He japes. Myrcella is being sold off like livestock, and he makes jokes. She stared at her diminutive sibling for a long time, weighing over the options in her mind. Finally she spoke. I will not allow this. Tyrion returned her gaze. It's done, Cersei. No, I won't allow. Sister. Tyrion snapped, his patience seemingly exhausted. We need Dorne. Stannis Baratheon plans to march against us, with the whole power of the Stormlands at his back. Gods know what the Reach plan to do. We need allies, and the Dornish are the only ones available to us, or at least close enough to have any impact. Cersei looked disbelievingly at her younger sibling. Dorne has the smallest army of the Seven Kingdoms, what use could they be to us? Besides, the Martells hate us with a passion. Oberyn Martell has made no secret that he considers the death of his sister and her children to be nothing more than wanton murder. An act for which he blames us. There is a reason that Robert never ventured to Dorne throughout his reign. They may hate us. Tyrion shrugged. But Doran Martell is far from stupid. He sees the value of this alliance. Idiot. Of course he does. He gets Myrcella as a hostage to use against us. Cersei's voice had edged towards hysteria. My little girl will be a prisoner in that desert wasteland. At least she will be alive. Tyrion said, sadness filling his voice. We need this alliance, Cersei, and a marriage contract is the surest way of securing it. But what do we gain from this alliance? She had asked, anger and contempt seeping into her voice. Oh, he thinks he's so clever, but he has no idea about politics, much less about armies. Tyrion closed his eyes briefly, as if steeling himself for a laborious task. We gain a friend in the south. A friend. Cersei exploded. Had she been close enough, she would have throttled her dwarf of a brother. What use is that? Her brother sighed. If we ally with the Martells, that will present an enemy force at the rear of Stannis and Highgarden. Hopefully this will give them second thoughts about attacking us. He's been drinking. That's the only explanation for such folly. The Martells will never go to war for us. Even if they were inclined to, they'd never win against the power of the Reach or Stormlands. They don't have to fight. Tyrion said, a grim smile spread across his grotesque features. The threat alone may be enough to deter an invasion here. It will tie down some of our enemy's forces in the south. Neither Stannis nor Mace Tyrell are foolish enough to invade Dorne. No force has ever conquered that desert wasteland. No, it presents a problem for both those factions. One they will not know how to deal with. You'd be better off trying to secure an alliance with Highgarden. Cersei snapped. What do you think I've been trying to do? Tyrion retorted, angrily. Baelish returned empty-handed. That was a surprise to us all, Cersei thought. In his never-ending project to secure allies, Tyrion had sent Petyr Baelish to the Reach in order to negotiate an alliance with House Tyrell. All the signs were promising. It seemed that Mace Tyrell had not sided with Stannis in his campaign, and Renly Baratheon seemed to disappear as soon as he arrived in Highgarden. Unfortunately, though he had met with Lord Tyrell, Baelish had returned with nothing to show for it. It seems that the Tyrells were polite and had received the Master of Coin warmly. However, they had been non-committal, stating that they would not be drawn into the war at this stage. If Myrcella is to be married, Cersei said between clenched teeth, every word becoming a struggle, then it would be better that she marry the heir of Highgarden. At least then she is relatively close and would not have to be travel until the war is concluded and we are victorious. Tyrion's hands gripped the sides of his chair. He looked weary. Littlefinger was authorized to make any deal in order to secure the Reach. We even went as far as to offer them Joffrey as a groom. Joffrey! Cersei raged. Who in the name of the stranger does this little ingrate think he is? You thought to offer my son in marriage without so much as consulting me. Her hands clenched into fists so hard that she could feel her nails dig into her palms, drawing small rivets of blood. I have no need to consult you about anything, Tyrion replied. You have made a mess of this city. You have lost the Starks and have no allies to speak of in the south. If the Tyrells would have taken that monster, then we would have given him to them. 7 hells, we would have offered him gift-wrapped. He think he's so very clever. He's always thought highly of his intellect, the better to make up for his other shortcomings as a man. But what have all his schemes come to? Nothing. However, the Tyrells refused us. She blinked for a moment, not understanding. Do you mean to tell me they refused a marriage pact with the king? That Mace Tyrell, that fat ambitious fool, refused to ally his family with royalty. By the gods, it is almost laughable. Consider it, sister dear, a mark of the precarious situation we currently find ourselves in. Tyrion leaned his head back on the cushion of his chair and sighed again. Mace Tyrell was polite but claimed he couldn't make a decision at this time. What could that pathetic little man believe he's waiting for? This is farcical. The Tyrells are the most ambitious family in the 7 kingdoms and yet have turned down the opportunity to be connected to the throne. Baelish must have fouled up the negotiations. I'll make him master of the Black Cells, that may be more suitable for his lackluster talents. I imagine that the Tyrells are waiting to see who comes out on top before they declare themselves. Tyrion's face went grim. Of course there is an alternative that would explain their refusal, but that would be almost too horrible to contemplate. What can he mean? She looked at her brother as he appeared lost in thought. After a few moments she could take it no longer. What alternative? Tyrion regarded her. While he was in the Tyrell camp, Baelish heard rumors that a Tyrell delegation had headed north shortly before he arrived. Cersei looked at him, bewildered. For what possible purpose? Her brother reached forward to pour himself some wine. I can think of only one reason, to ally with the Starks. She felt her mouth drop open. Her mind raced at the implications. Impossible. The Tyrells would never be so bold. The Starks. What could have possessed the Tyrells to do that? Tyrion smiled at her, his face tight. He swilled the wine around his goblet. Well, if it's true, I would speculate that they think that the young wolf is winning and they want to be there when he triumphs. In addition, with Robb Stark now a king, Mace can fulfill his wish of being tied to royalty. The king in the north. An ancient title of a more barbaric time. But what of Joffrey? Her voice almost a whine, even to her. Joffrey's legitimacy is in doubt. Tyrion held up his hand as she made to scream a rebuttal at him. Not here of course, but across the kingdoms. Why marry into a potentially tainted bloodline when you can ally with a noble house with a king whose birth is undisputed? Plus, the Starks are winning, in case you hadn't noticed. Oh, the Tyrells will pay for this. I'll burn Highgarden to the ground and scatter the ashes of their house across the 7 kingdoms. The reigns of Castamere will seem like a mummer's farce when I'm done with the Reach. Spare me, she said contemptuously. The Stark boy may have won a few battles. 3 at last count. Tyrion interjected. But that is a far cry from winning a war. Father will rout him, given a little time. We do not have time, Circe. Tyrion said calmly, all traces of humor vanishing. He looked at her steadily. I want you to understand this. We are in a great deal of trouble. Again with the theatrics, little brother. She spat, loathing filling her voice. I know what his game is. You want to create a sense of panic so you can claim more power for yourself. Her brother simply sighed and drank deeply from his goblet. After a long moment he looked at her. We are in trouble. Denying the facts will not help us. Father is surrounded. Tyrion exclaimed, banging his free fist on the armrest of his chair. For the love of your children, sister, you have to see sense. Her brother jumped out of his chair, set the goblet down, and started pacing the room. He turned to look at her. Father is losing the war. Stunted little fool. What do you know about war? Tyrion looked at her with a sense of pity. Nothing, but I can read a map. We have lost half our armies. Jaime is a prisoner. Father is cut off and in hostile territory facing the combined might of the North and the Riverlands. We have no reinforcements to send him. What forces we did have in the West were eliminated at Oxcross. The Westerlands are being pillaged by Northmen with no hope of relief. I would not think it too long before Casterly Rock itself is under siege. You exaggerate the situation. Besides, the rock has never fallen. And never will. Again, you think too much in broad strokes, sweet sister. The rock doesn't have to fall, simply coming under siege sends a powerful message. House Lannister has reigned supreme for decades because it was believed that our father was an unbeatable commander. Even the Mad King never moved against him. Our house has been unchallenged since the days of the Tarbeck Rebellion. The rock is seen as a living embodiment of our power. For us to lose our power and wealth and then have this symbol attacked is a message to the realm that our house is on the verge of falling. Cersei's face went white. Father will defeat them. He still has a large and disciplined force. He does. Tyrion allowed. But he has enemies on all sides. The only option he has is to strike south towards us. But, if he does so, then we're abandoning our homelands to conquerors. Cersei's looked at him witheringly. As I recall, you were charged, as Hand of the King, with raising another army to support father in his efforts. Her brother stared despairingly at her. Tell me, Your Grace, where am I supposed to find an army? I have increased the number of gold cloaks. At least one of us has some sense. Wonderful. Her brother chortled. Let's march an army of untrained, undisciplined louts up the King's Road to Harrenhal. I can see father now. Standing there amongst the ruffians your toadies have recruited. He'll look fondly on us for that, let me tell you. Cersei glared at her brother. Well, what are you doing to remedy this dire situation? Tyrion became cagey. I am doing what I can. What you can. Cersei laughed mirthlessly. Forgive me, little brother, but it doesn't appear that you're up to very much. If the pressures of being Hand of the King are too much for you, perhaps you better retreat to your bed. She smiled sweetly, maybe your little whore can keep you company. Tyrion's eyes blazed at the mention of his latest bed warmer. Oh yes, brother dear, I know all about her. Her brother paused for a moment before speaking. It is pointless to argue amongst ourselves. We have plenty of enemies to go around. Yes, and what are you and father doing about them? Tyrion eyed her warningly. I have already explained that father cannot move from his current position without yielding the Westerlands. Cersei snorted. It doesn't appear that he's in any position to do anything about them anyway. Tell me, my Lord Hand, what benefit is there to father sitting at Harrenhal helpless while our enemies ravage our homeland with impunity? Her brother went silent. He gazed out of the window in silent contemplation. Ah, got you there, little brother. You have a point, Tyrion said reluctantly, turning to face her. Oh, it must have hurt you to say that. But the position of father's army ties up the bulk of Riverrun's forces and most of the northern foot. He just cannot move unless we attempt to provide an opportunity. Cersei pressed her advantage. And what, pray tell, are you doing to provide such an opportunity? Her tone was scathing. Tyrion suddenly smiled at her. Why, my most beloved sister, I am looking for aid outside of our own forces. For the moment, absent of anyone else, I have settled on the Martells. There must be someone else. Cersei said stubbornly. No one nearby. Tyrion said with a shake of his head. I am sending Littlefinger to bargain with Lysa Arryn, but I am not hopeful that she will join against her father and nephew. Without them there are precious few allies left. What of sellswords? Cersei again on the verge of hysteria. Send across the narrow sea for the Gold Company or the Second Sons. Her brother rocked with laughter. And how would I pay them, O Queen Regent? Surely it has not escaped your notice that we are almost bankrupt. Doubling the city guard was a costly business, as is feeding the city. Cersei rolled her eyes. This again. Who cares if the small folk go hungry? There is a reason we call them small. They are as nothing to us. Tyrion stopped laughing abruptly. We care, my queen, because there are many more of them than there are of us. The Tyrells have stopped supplying the city. Food levels are growing perilously low. If we don't alleviate the problem, we won't hold the city back. Stannis won't have to take the city, the small folk will have eaten us alive before he gets here. They had argued for several hours, but in the end Cersei had begrudgingly agreed to go along with her brother's plan and consent to the betrothal of her daughter to the heir of Sunspear. I should never have been swayed. My children belong with me. She had stood at the pier of King's Landing along with a party from the Red Keep to see her only daughter off on the sea voyage to Drone. Cersei has stood still as a statue as her daughter wept tearfully at being parted from her family. I will not give my brother the satisfaction of seeing me weep. I am a daughter of the Rock and they will never see my tears. It was when the royal party had begun to make their way back to the Red Keep that the trouble began. A crowd had gathered, a natural occurrence, the small folk gathering to see their masters. But then cries of anguish and pleas for help had started. The party quickly became surrounded, the way barred by thin peasants holding out their hands for arms. The noise and smell, always unpleasant at the best of times when one went through the streets of King's Landing, had become insufferable. The sounds of crying peasants had reached fever pitch. Eventually, Tyrion had spoken to Joffrey, who had taken some coins and attempted to give them to a woman holding a small bundle. Evidently her whelp. However, Joffrey had clearly been repulsed by the woman and her babe, even more so when it was revealed that the child had long since died. The mother carrying it around as some kind of macabre gesture. Joffrey had recoiled and almost thrown the coins at the woman. The crowd had erupted in jeers and curses. Ungrateful peasants. The king offers money from his own person and they dare to curse him. The guards had been at a loss over what to do. They tried to force their way through the crowd, but it was tough going due to the weight of numbers against them. The taunts and catcalls had rapidly intensified. Then, out of nowhere, a wad of mud was thrown from the crowd and struck Joffrey's face. There had been a moment of stunned silence. The crowd itself seemed shocked to see wet mud dripping from their king's face and onto his pristine clothes. It had been her son who broke the silence. I want his head. Kill them. Kill them all. The soldiers surrounding the king had had no choice but to force their way through the throng of peasants, hacking and slashing to try and create a path. Within moments blood ran through the street. At the sight of blood and the king's men killing their fellow people, a full-scale riot had broken out. The guards had managed to barge their way through with the spears and shields. Within a short time most of the party had arrived back at the Red Keep. There had been casualties, several of the party were still missing and at least one of the king's guard lay dead on the filthy cobbles of the capital. Despite no longer having any noble targets to attack, the mob had continued their rampage, destroying shops and killing merchants at will. With so many of the small folk rioting, there seemed to be little recourse but to allow them to wear themselves out. Ignorant rabble. They complain and poverty and starvation, and now they are looting and killing the very people who might have been able to relieve their so-called suffering. Cersei had stayed long enough in the small council chambers to hear her brother order a curfew and to order the city watch to begin forming up with the aim of using disciplined numbers to enforce order on the streets. Cersei had fumed from her seat at the council table. It's like a bandage over a gaping wound. The whole event should never have happened. My brother has proved totally incapable of handling the charge our father gave him. Her brother had even had the effrontery to suggest that the Lannister house guard be used to help quell the disorder. Cersei had turned that suggestion down with barely a thought. Their first duty is to protect the king," she had said with contempt. Grand Maester Pycelle had looked at her, his rheumy eyes watering. "Your Grace, if we do not restore order then the city will fall to ruin. Who will protect the king then? Useless old man." She looked at the other councillors. Varys, Baelish, Bywater and her hated brother. They all have the look of men who believe they are vindicated in their suspicions that something like this might happen. If that's the case, maybe they should have done something to prevent it in the first place. She had stood. "The Lannister guards remain where they are. You have mercenaries, brother, perhaps they should earn their gold for once. And maybe the rabble and tribesmen would tear each other apart. Wouldn't that be sweet?" She had walked from the room, her long purposeful stride belying the roiling mass of nerves underneath. Sitting now, in her room, nursing a goblet of wine between her hands, Cersei was forced to come to some dark conclusions. "We are no longer safe here. There aren't enough men to protect us and father will not send us more no matter how much Joffrey may command it. What to do then? Joffrey could not leave the capital. The symbolism of having the king vacate his throne would be too much. Plus her pride rankled at the idea of abandoning the city to an unruly mob. No, Joffrey could not leave, and if he stayed then so must she. With Jaime and now Myrcella gone, there was but one other person Cersei cared for in King's Landing. Tommen. "I must protect my little boy." She would have to send him away. While the thought caused her grief, she consoled herself with the idea that at least he would be safe. Plans would have to be put in place to bring that about. She doubted that her brother would allow her to simply send him away. No, a more subtle scheme was called for. There was also the issue of King's Landing. While her father had charged Tyrion was the city's protection, it was now painfully obvious that her deformed little brother had not the wit nor capability needed for the task. It would fall to her to enact her father's commands, to rise to the challenge as presented. Cersei shook her head. "I should not be surprised. It is often down to me to be the one who does what is necessary." Thankfully she had already begun this process. She had never trusted her brother to be able to defend the city against the likes of Stannis Baratheon. Cersei had decided early on that she would have to take matters into her own hands. Tyrion talks about alliances and treaties, but it is I who have put in place his measure to defeat the Baratheons. She smiled to herself as she took another long drink from her goblet. Once she had dealt with the invaders, she would begin rooting out problems closer to home. Cersei reached for the small bell that would summon her handmaiden. There is much work to be done. Chapter 17, Margaery 2. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. She sat across from the other woman who seemed engrossed in the letter she held in front of her. Her eyes reread the letter again and again as if trying to determine some hidden meaning. Does she believe the letter's words will change if she just stares at them long enough? "My lady," she said softly. "It is bad enough to be summoned here without having to then wait for an explanation for why I was asked to come in the first place." Lady Catelyn sighed deeply and set the letter on the table in front of her. "My apologies, Lady Margaery. I have just received word from the Vale." "Oh," Margaery said, her attention piqued. "Has your sister finally decided to join King Robb?" "No," Catelyn said bluntly, looking absently out of the room's large window to watch the trident as it flowed inexorably past. "She has not." Margaery could not understand. "Surely with our forces joining Robb's we have created an unbeatable force. It would make sense for Lysa Arryn to join us and present an even bigger problem for Tywin Lannister. Surely." She spoke cautiously, careful not to incur the other woman's anger. "Surely she does not mean to declare for Joffrey." "My sister," Catelyn Stark said with a tone of bitter regret, "says nothing at all. It is Lady Waynwood who writes to me." Lady Waynwood. Margaery was not an expert in the noble houses of the Vale. "The mistress of Iron Oaks. She is an old friend of the family. She writes that Lysa has received all my letters but is ignoring them. More than that, she has forbidden any knight of the Vale to come to our aid." Anger creased Lady Stark's face. "She will not even come to say goodbye to her father, even though I have begged her to." Margaery paused, considering. "She must be terribly afraid, my lady." It is a long way and she would have to pass Lord Tywine and his army at Harrenhal before she arrived here at Riverrun. Catelyn's eyes blazed. The others take Tywine Lannister. Her father is dying, no matter what has passed between them in the past she should be here now. Family. Duty. Honor. The Tully words. But forgive me Lady Margaery. Catelyn said, turning her attention away from the river and back to the maiden in front of her. I did not bring you here is discuss my sister. Margaery nodded slightly. That, I could have guessed. Lady Stark crossed her hands as she rested them on her lap. It has not gone unnoticed that you are spending a lot of time with my son. As subtle as a knife thrust, my lady. Yes, my lady. The king commands that I accompany him on occasion. Catelyn's expression was stony. I'd hardly refer to 3 or 4 times a day on occasion. You take your meals with him. You go riding together. I have even heard that you walk arm in arm among the small folk laughing and jesting. Margaery smiled to herself. Well, it would seem that the gossip mill of Riverrun is just as effective as every other town in the 7 kingdoms. All I do is at his grace's command. I am merely his humble servant. Catelyn suppressed a grimace. Of course you do, my lady. But I think you would agree it is inappropriate for a king to spend so much time with a young woman to whom he is not betrothed. Give me time, my lady. We have only just met. Margaery inclined her head in a show of contrition. Forgive me, my lady, but my house is sworn to the king. He has asked me to spend time with him. I do so not only to obey my king's command but also to foster good relations between the North and the South. Lady Stark looked at her unblinking. She is not fooled for a moment, but she cannot say that I am doing anything wrong. Truth be told, I haven't done anything wrong. Robb Stark has been infuriatingly honorable as far as that is concerned. It had been her grandmother's scheme, Margaery reflected. Lady Olenna had spoken to Margaery before she left Bitterbridge to join Lady Catelyn and Garlan on the road north. You are a beauty, my dear. Olenna had chuckled. Men are often falling at your feet. Don't forget to use that power. Margaery had been filled with doubt. I am not sure, grandmother. Renly wasn't at all interested in me. Olenna snorted. Renly's affections lay elsewhere, as you and everyone with half a brain knows. Even so. The younger woman replied. There is no guarantee that Robb Stark will feel differently. He might already have a betrothed or have a lover. His mother has been away for some time, things might have changed in her absence. Pa! Olenna snapped. Your grandfather was practically betrothed before I stumbled across him. Her grandmother's eyes narrowed slightly. It's up to you, my Rose, but it has been my experience that when you offer a man something new and different he jumps at the chance. Margaery's eyes widened in shock. Surely, grandmother, you do not intend that I should lie with him, before we marry? Such an act, while hardly unprecedented, would pose all kinds of risks. What if he uses me and discards me after? Many men do. Her grandmother's aged face grew still. It will be up to you to be sure he does not. Let us be clear, Margaery, we have determined to ally with the Starks against the Lannisters. We have cast the runes. It is up to you to make certain that they favor us. She felt a weight descend on her. A sick feeling of dread coiled in her stomach. So much depends on me. The Tyrell matriarch continued. If we cannot effect a proper alliance with the North, we will have no choice but to turn to either the Lannisters or Stannis Baratheon. The choice between a family accused of incest or a madman who burns his own people. Wonderful. Besides, Olenna continued dismissively. I doubt it will be a problem. The Starks are winning this war and Robb Stark is reputedly his father's son, consumed with thoughts of honor and chivalry. Bed him, my sweet little Rose, and he will make you a queen. Unfortunately, what her grandmother had apparently failed to consider was that self-same honor she mocked about Robb Stark had prevented him from accepting the offers that Margaery had presented him with. At first she had thought he had not understood what she was offering. The young wolf struck her as a man inexperienced with women, and it was not impossible that he did not know how to take advantage of a willing maid. He desired her. Of that she had no doubt. Margaery had seen men look at her a certain way ever since her adolescence. She found him gazing at her when he thought she couldn't see. He spent an inordinate time in her presence and freely talked with her on any number of subjects. She just could not seem to move the conversation towards any kind of physical intimacy. At one point they had been walking the ramparts discussing the courtly practices of Highgarden. Margaery had pretended to stumble and fell against the king in order to keep from falling. Robb's strong arms had caught and steadied her. She came up close, inside his arms until they stood almost face to face, their noses practically touching. Margaery had leaned in, fully expecting the king to kiss her. She was to be disappointed. Robb has pulled away, though his arms never loosened their hold on her torso. "It's all right," she said, trying to spur him on. "I want you to." She placed her hand on his broad chest. She leaned forward again. Robb stood back, this time removing his hand from her. "I can't, my lady, I'm sorry." Margaery looked coyly at the king. "You can, your grace. You just have to allow yourself to enjoy the moment." Robb's eyes widened briefly and then set with steely resolve. He caught her wrists gently as she reached for him. "No, my lady." Margaery had been confused. "He wants me, I know he does. Why does he resist? Is there another?" The thought caused a pang of alarm deep within her. She tried a different tact. Fixing her eyes on the floor she murmured softly. "Do you not find me attractive, your grace?" "No," Robb said in a rush, eager not to cause offense. "It is not that. Not at all. You are beautiful, my lady." Margaery raised her head, tears coming from her eyes. "Then why do you fight this? Why deny what is growing between us?" The king's face went red. For a moment he looked longingly at her for a moment but then shook his head, as if trying to wake himself from a dream. "I do not deny it, my lady." His voice heavy with regret. "It is not that simple." Margaery stepped forward, her close proximity causing Robb to inhale her scent. "There is nothing simpler, your grace. You are a king. You can take whatever, or whomever, you want." She could have sworn she saw Robb's face become an even darker shade of crimson. He closed his eyes, trying to deny the vision in front of him. "Would that it was as easy as that, my lady." "It is easy, your grace." Margaery's arms tried to encircle the king's neck. "I want you, you know it. Just allow it to happen." Robb firmly reached up and took her hands in his. He pulled them away and clasped them in front of him. He regarded her with his deep blue eyes. "I will not dishonor you so, my lady." Margaery stared at him. It dawned on her quickly that the young man in front of her had more willpower than anyone she had ever encountered before. Robb Stark wanted her. His breathing was shallow, his eyes all but glazed over, but here, now, he was like a cliff being battered by the sea. He might lose bits and pieces but the edifice remained intact. Though even a cliff can fall if struck enough over time. She looked pleadingly at him. "It would just be between you and I, Robb." She smiled mischievously. "No one else would have to know." The blue eyes did not waver. "I would know." The king looked briefly past her. "One day I hope to be married and have children." He returned his gaze to her. "And when those children look to their father they will see a man of honor and dignity. A father they can be proud of." By the gods, I think he means it. Suddenly, absurdly, Margaery felt overwhelmed by shame. She had offered herself to this man like a common whore, albeit one whose price would have been a kingdom. She realized now that her father and grandmother were both wrong. Robb Stark would not be overcome with an attractive body and a welcoming smile. The ice-cold north would not be melted so easily by the warm south. "I feel like a stupid little girl." Trembling at her master's lessons. She turned away from the king, real tears now flowed from her eyes. Though whether it was shame or relief she could not tell. If she were honest, Margaery had hoped that Robb would reject this offering. She wanted to know she was correct about the kind of man he was. Margaery had made discreet inquiries and discovered that Robb did not frequent the whorehouse in Riverrun like his uncle. Nor were there any stories of him doing so at Winterfell. He did not seem to bed maidservants or take advantage of his noble's daughters. If not for the way he looked at her, she could well have believed that Robb was of the same disposition as Renly. An unsettling thought came to her. "I did not want Robb to have me like this." I want him to see me as an equal, not as a disposable chattel. She reflected quickly how Catelyn Stark had spoken about her relationship with her husband. When listening to the story of their marriage, Margaery had felt an odd feeling come over her. The Starks love each other, despite the marriage being arranged. Eddard Stark treats his wife like an equal, she feels valued and knows her opinion is regarded. This remarkable situation seemed to have been achieved effortless. Margaery had been trained from a young age that women are expected to be background players in a world run by men. Very much like my mother. Whilst women may have influence, they would never be the equal of men. Her grandmother was the exception, of course. But that was because her husband was long dead and she held sway over her son. Margaery had expected much the same would happen to her. Her betrothal to Renly had confirmed these fears. I will not be loved or cherished, merely used as a means to secure an alliance and heirs. The only influence I could hope to have would be through my children. Margaery's time with Robb Stark had shed a different light on things. He talked about a range of issues and seemed to value her thoughts. He listened intently when she spoke and asked questions, as if seeking further insight. For the first time in her life she felt respected and well thought of. She felt that she was valued for her mind rather than just her body. During their time together, Margaery had started to see the situation differently to what she had been led to believe it should be. She had found Robb to be an impressive figure. He had spoken with intelligence and wisdom. He belied his youth. He was kind and generous. Anxious, perhaps overly anxious, to do the right thing. Still, that is no bad thing in a king. Robb had leaned towards her and wiped her tears away. Do not cry, my lady. There is nothing to be upset about. Come, let us walk some more. He offered his arm to her, and she had taken it, grateful that no one appeared to have witnessed the event. The sounds of a throat being cleared brought Margaery's attention back to the present. Lady Catelyn was looking at her strangely. Her regal face pinched into an expression of perplexity. I'm sorry, my lady. Margaery said demurely. My mind was elsewhere. So it would seem. Catelyn replied in a clipped tone. I will not detain you any longer, my lady, but I would ask you to remember that my son is in great demand. It would be selfish of you to keep him to yourself. Margaery rose from her seat. Of course, my lady. You are quite correct, there are great demands on his grace's time. I would not dream of occupying him when he has other important things to attend to. Lady Stark eyed her suspiciously. She didn't miss that. By implication, I note that I am one of Robb's important things. Catelyn Stark stood. Then we are agreed. But be careful, my lady, there are many here who are angry at the preference my son has shown you and the Tyrells. She looked in surprise at Robb's mother. Oh, my lady. How can that be? We have been at such pains to get on with everyone here. The phrase for one. Catelyn said, her tone harsh with restrained anger. Lothar and Black Walder Free are said to be angered at the reluctance of my son to consider the marriage proposal from Lord Walder. Surely, Margaery said in a measured tone. We are at war. Marriage is the last thing on the king's mind. Catelyn's mouth pulled into a tight smile. I could not agree more, my lady. Which is why it is important that no one thinks differently. Well played, my lady. And father always said Northerners were a dim-witted lot. Margaery nodded lightly and walked to the chamber door. Still Catelyn called after her. I suppose Robb will be leaving soon. The war still needs fighting. With a heavy heart, Margaery stepped from the room. Outside she made through the corridor, her thoughts conflicted. She barely noticed that Myra Forrester had stepped in behind her. Margaery had known that it was only a matter of time before Robb left Riverrun to continue the campaign against the Lannisters. Even so, she was reluctant to see him go. She had come to feel an abiding affection for the young wolf and enjoyed the time they had spent together. Though it seemed that had inevitably drawn the ire of others. Let the others look. This is how it's going to be. Let them grumble. They made their way through Riverrun's corridors, now familiar to the Tyrells due to their month-long stay. Myra did not say a word as they walked, being quietly attentive to the fact that her mistress was deep in thought. They had no guards with them, Margaery having dispensed with bodyguards them as soon as they arrived at Riverrun. Deep in Allied territory, it would be unseemly to give the impression that I feel in need of protection. They soon arrived at Margary's chambers. Myra opened the door and Margary stepped through. Inside, one of her other handmaidens, Saya, was cleaning the floor. Seeing Margary, she stepped back and curtsied. "Pardon me, my lady. I thought you would be gone for hours." She held a hand up to the girl. "It is quite all right, Saya. I needed to come somewhere quiet to think." Saya nodded eagerly in understanding. Margary crossed the room and sat in one of the comfortable chairs provided by the Tullys. She turned to address her two handmaidens. "Have either of you heard about the Frizz being angry about our arrival?" Saya shook her head slowly. Myra Forrester spoke, clearly and directly. "There are rumors, my lady, that they are envious of the time you're spending with the king." "Well, that is to be expected. What is their objection to that?" Margary asked, already knowing the answer. Myra did not flinch. "The Frizz have made it known that King Rob has a standing invitation to take any of the Frizz for a wife. Even the men." Margary jested, her mouth curling in a smile. Saya tittered. "The king might prefer one of the men if the rumors about the three women are true." The three women shared a laugh. Myra suddenly grew serious. "I have heard the Frizz spreading terrible rumors about you, my lady. They are calling you the Southern whore. They say you have ensnared the king with your wiles. That you already share his bed." Saya let out a gasp, her hand rushing to cover her open mouth. Margary smiled softly. "Oh, if only they knew the truth. Rumors don't hurt unless people start to believe them. Still, it does not do to have some of the northern host set against us. We must make overtures to the Frizz soon." Her handmaidens nodded obediently. Margary looked from one girl to the other. "They are good, loyal servants. I will have need of them if our plans are to reach fruition." Saya spoke. "I think it would be a shame for the king to marry a Free. They are all so ghastly and the king is so handsome." The girl's eyes glazed over as she became lost in her thoughts of the young wolf. "Yes, he is." Margary shook herself. "I was sent here to seduce him, not the other way around." But then she considered. "No, that is how it started, but now things are different. I want to marry Rob, but not just for House Tyrell. I want to be his wife. His partner. To share in his power, not steal bits and pieces of it like a thief. Father will achieve what he wants, but that doesn't mean I can't be happy. And I know I could be very happy with Rob Stark." A knock sounded at the door. Myra answered and Margary could hear a servant speak from outside. "Forgive the interruption, my lady. The king has requested the presence of the Lady Margary." Myra answered softly. "Of course, please tell the king that my lady will be along presently." "Where is the king?" Margary asked from behind Myra. "Perhaps he would like another late afternoon stroll." "Forgive me, my lady, but the king is presiding over a council, which is due to start in a few minutes." Margary was confused. "Then perhaps you'd better come back when he is finished, sir. Otherwise I will be waiting outside the council chamber needlessly." The servant, a young boy, blanched visibly. "Forgive me, my lady. The king has asked for you to attend him at council." Myra and Saya looked at each other, their eyes open wide in wonderment. It was highly unusual for a woman to be allowed to even sit in at a war council, much less be requested to do so. Margary could not help but smile. Her heart lifted at the feeling of being valued and wanted. Slowly but surely, even a cliff can be worn away. Notes. Thank you all for your comments and words of support. Please rest assured that I read them all. I resist commenting on points simply because I don't want to give anything away about future chapters. Please keep commenting, it's nice to know that people are enjoying the story. Chapter 18, Tyrion 3. Chapter text. "It is confirmed," he said, placing the scroll back onto the table in front of him. "The Tyrells have pledged allegiance to the Starks." "Outrageous." Pycelle rumbled, his voice a cross between a wheeze and a croak. "Such treachery must be punished severely." "I quite agree, Grand Maester." Littlefinger leaned back casually in his chair, practicing his perfect air of nonchalance. "Though who will punish them is a matter of debate." Baelish's eyes lit up with amusement as he smiled. Perhaps you could invoke the rest of your brethren at the citadel into writing terse letters to Mace Tyrell. That should bring him into line. Oh, well said, you whoremongering bastard. Perhaps if you were witty in your negotiations as you are in your jests we might not be in this absurd position. Pycelle glowered at Littlefinger, his eyes reflecting his disdain for the master of coin but also revealing a hint of distress that he was evidently no longer held with the same respect by members of the small council. Since Tyrion had decided to throw a boon to his sister and release her pet Maester from the Black Cells, Pycelle had seemed to be a shadow of his former self. His imprisonment may well have broken him. He seems to have lost more than just his beard as a result of his trip to the bowels of the Red Keep. Tyrion's eyes flickered across the table at the group of men assembled before him. Of all of them he could only say that he trusted Jocelyn Bywater. Pycelle was still very much Cersei's creature, though the fight seemed to have gone out of him. He sat slumped in his chair staring aimlessly at his hands which lay across his stomach. Littlefinger was only loyal to himself, with not a thought in his head for anyone else, beyond what use they might be to him. Though, I can respect that. Then there was Varys. In some ways Tyrion thought of Varys as his best friend and worst enemy. The man was an enigma. Even when confirming the dire news that Mace Tyrell had sworn allegiance to the North, his voice did not change nor show any distress at the dire straits they all now found themselves. If anything, his face reflected a wry amusement at the substantial turn the wheel of fate seemed to be taking against them. And these are my allies and advisors. Maybe it would be better if the city fell. By rights, of course, the small council should not be as small as it currently was. There should masters of laws and ships to assist him in his role as Hand of the King. However, of those previously to hold the posts, one had disappeared and the other was now hell-bent on attacking the very city he was supposed to defend. The gods have a sense of irony, I suppose. Maybe that's to make up for any sense of compassion or logic. The Lord Commander of the King's Guard was also guaranteed a position here among the other advisors to the king. Of course Jaime was unavailable to fulfill his role, still being kept a prisoner in the Riverlands. Still, he'd be useless if he were here. Tyrion mused. My big brother was never one for meetings and councils. At least I have Bywater to advise me on military matters. Tyrion's eyes found the commander of the city watch. The man sat, straight-backed, in his chair observing the meeting. The grim-faced soldier had not said a word at the news of the Tyrells' new allegiances but merely considering events grimly. This turn of events is unfortunate, Tyrion said, addressing the council. However, it is not as bad as it seems. He saw the council members stiffen slightly at the blatant lie. He saw Baelish barely surpass a guffaw. Smile, you bastard, and I'll have your face opened. Pycelle looked askance at him. Not as bad as it seems. The Maester wrinkled face twisted in confusion. He took a deep breath. Forgive me, my Lord Hand, but this is a calamity. Hardly. Tyrion said, reaching for a goblet of wine. It's all about confidence. Granted, we would have wished that the Tyrells join us, but the fact is, things could be worse. The Grand Maester looked at him. By his expression he couldn't have been more shocked if a dragon had suddenly arrived and taken its place at the council table. Could be worse. The echo of Tyrion's own words were laced with contempt. My lord, we have lost the second most powerful house in the realm. Not only that, they've gone over to the rebels. I'd revise that assessment if I was you, Grand Maester. Baelish said wryly, throwing a mocking look at Pycelle. House Lannister isn't the power it was a year ago. Tyrion shot him a warning glare. He wouldn't dare have said that if Cersei of Father were present. Both have killed a man for lesser offenses. If you feel you've chosen the wrong side, Lord Baelish, his tone heavy with menace, you can always leave. Littlefinger did not look frightened, though his head dipped slightly. My apologies, my lord. I am, and always have been, loyal to House Lannister. I was merely pointing out that the war is not going our way. The words hung there for a moment before Littlefinger went on. At least now we know why Mace Tyrell rejected your generous offer of an alliance. It's clear he had already decided to broker a deal with Robb Stark. True enough. My Lord Varys spoke softly from near the end of the long table, his arms folded into his sleeves. But still, House Lannister surely had more to offer in a negotiation than the Starks. Baelish smiled grimly at the Master of Whispers. One cannot convince the sky to call back the rain after a heavy shower. Varys returned the smile of his opponent. Maybe not, but one can take measures to ensure one doesn't get wet. The eunuch's face twisted to face Tyrion, though his eyes did not leave Baelish. Perhaps, our Master of Coin isn't as great a negotiator as we supposed. Pycelle coughed lightly, the sound mixed with a gentle wheeze. The Tyrells have always been ambitious upstarts, since before Aegon's Landing. The old man shook his head gently. But to think that they would betray the crown is, well, it's beyond contempt. Time to put an end to this. Tyrion sat forward in his chair. Contemptible or not, my lords, the Tyrells have declared against us, now we must deal with them. Rest assured, plans are in place to do just that. The gathered men look at him with keen interest. Might I be as bold as to enquire what plans these are? Baelish asked. Buggered if I know. I just made that up. My father and I have been in communication. Tyrion said, smiling thinly. We have made plans to resolve matters to our satisfaction. For now, my lords, we continue as if nothing has changed. The invoking of Lord Tywin's name seemed to placate the small council, just as Tyrion knew it would. Say what you like about Tywin Lannister, and I could say a lot, but his name still strikes fear and obedience into lesser men. On to more pressing business, my lords. How fares the city? Might as well try and move things on from this disaster. The meeting ran for the next 2 hours, covering a range of matters. He had found all of them tedious but pressed through them. Just as a good little hand should. Eventually Tyrion dismissed the council, saying they would meet again in 2 days. Maybe by that time I'll have a solution to the problems presenting us. As he made his way from the chamber, he felt, rather than heard, Varys step up behind him. Strange, usually there is no warning. You just turn to discover he's right on top of you. Might I trouble you for a word, my Lord Hand? Tyrion sighed inwardly. One would think you've troubled me enough over the last 2 hours, my lord. Varys tittered at the jest. He bowed his head apologetically. Indeed, my lord. My apologies, but what I would discuss with you is not for the ears of the other members of the council. Tyrion motioned that Varys should step in beside him. They walked together down a passageway overlooking one of the Red Keep's many courtyards. And what can I do for you, my lord? The mysterious Master of Whisperers matched Tyrion's stride. Not a difficult task when you consider his legs are twice the size of mine. I wanted you to know that Lord Stannis is on the march. Tyrion did not break stride. I'm aware of this. You reported as much at the last council meeting. Varys nodded. I did, my Lord Hand. But I've just received word that, not only is he marching his army on foot from the Stormlands, his fleet is also making its way up the coast. The eunuch's face was grave. It appears that Lord Stannis intends to attack the city from 2 fronts. 7 hells. Still, it is as I suspected. It's what I would do in his place. He knows we barely have the numbers to fight on one front, much less 2. Still walking, Tyrion tilted his head upwards to regard the taller man. I could ask why you didn't bring this news before the small council. Varys smiled as he looked down at Tyrion. You could indeed ask that, my lord. Thrust. Counter-thrust. It really is endless. Tyrion stopped suddenly in the hall, regarding Varys coolly. And, having done so, I would expect an answer. Not expecting the sudden halt. Varys was wrong-footed and had to turn suddenly. The eunuch was brought up short. However, with grace that belied his portly stomach, he pivoted gracefully and faced Tyrion. He bowed low, the small smile never leaving his face. Forgive me, my lord. He said, his voice as smooth as silk. I did not think the council would want any more dire news. Not just after the confirmation of the Tyrells joining the Starks. Oh, I don't know, Tyrion said, resuming his walk. It might be better that we get all the bad news out at once. Varys resumed, following him. There is also the fact that Grand Maester Pycelle would most likely have told the Queen, which could have made your position even more difficult. Well, that was true enough. Tyrion thought. Cersei has been nothing but a pain the last week. Not that she was a ray of sunshine before the riot, of course. He nodded briskly. I thank you for the news, but do not be concerned, my lord. Everything is under control. His companion tittered, causing Tyrion to eye him warily. Seeing the look, Varys simpered. Oh, do forgive me, my lord, but please, extend me the same courtesy you require from others. Tyrion regarded him. What is that supposed to mean? His voice was cold. Varys smiled. Only that I know for a fact that you have received no word from your father for some time now. Curses. Tyrion kept his face impassive, betraying only a mild curiosity. Don't misunderstand me, my lord. Varys went on. I quite agree with your decision to give hope to your small council and indeed the queen, who seems to have got all kinds of fanciful ideas in her head of late. Don't even begin with the nonsense Cersei has been considering. The pair turned a corner leading to the Tower of the Hand. They paused at the foot of a set of stairs set into the wall. Varys regarded Tyrion smugly. But just between us, you have to admit that your lord father does appear to have got himself in quite a mess in the Riverlands. Surrounded on all sides except the south. Tyrion began the arduous task of climbing the stairs, his small legs struggling with the steepness. He called over his shoulder. There's always the Vale, my lord. He had meant it as a flippant comment, designed to throw Varys off balance and allow Tyrion to leave the conversation with the upper hand. However, as always, the Master of Whisperers had a ready reply. Oh, I wouldn't have thought that Littlefinger will have any more success with Lady Arryn than he did with Mace Tyrell. I really shouldn't be surprised that he knows these things. There is as reason he's called the Spider. Even so, Baelish's mission was supposed to be a secret. Tyrion paused on the stairs and looked down at the other man. At least it gives me legs a rest. Don't be too sure, my lord. Littlefinger is a childhood friend of Lysa Arryn, he may yet surprise us. Varys did not seem perturbed. Doubtless he already knew about the connection between Petyr Baelish and Lysa Arryn. I am sure he'll be able to charm Lysa Arryn into being neutral, but I would wager he has next to no chance convincing the Knights of the Vale to fight the Starks. From his place on the stairs, Tyrion smiled tightly. Perhaps you forget, Lord Varys, the houses of the Vale are sworn to serve the Arryns. Varys returned the smile. I forget nothing, my lord Hand. I merely offer the advice that sending our Master of Coin to negotiate is a fool's errand. Lord Baelish may be able to convince Lysa Arryn to support us, but it is unlikely she will allow her armies to leave the Vale in order to fight. She strikes me as a very frightened woman. Tyrion kept his face as still as he could, not wanting to betray how accurate he found Varys' appraisal to be. He was just about to reply when another voice echoed through the stone corridors. Uncle! I have been looking for you. Tyrion shuddered inwardly, an instinctive reaction to the voice and the person from whom it came. His shoulders sagged slightly, but then he composed himself and turned towards the sound of approaching footsteps. Across the corridor, flanked by his mother and escorted by 2 knights of the King's Guard, strode King Joffrey Baratheon. He steeled himself for the inevitable confrontation. It seems you have found me, your grace. He noted without a trace of sarcasm. Joffrey stopped at the foot of the steps. Varys, bowing low, stepped back so that uncle and nephew could look at each other unhindered. The eunuch retreated a few steps to observe the confrontation whilst staying on the periphery. A clever move. The boy king was resplendent in a silk doublet, lions and stags interwoven in the fabric. Sat amongst his blonde curls the king wore his crown. And, as always, a finely crafted sword was by his side. The boy so wants to be like his father. Tyrion reflected. To be seen as a warrior. Though despite all his best efforts to the contrary, Robert could never be a bigger fool as his so-called son is. He knew he should bow, or make his way back down the stair to address his lord and master. It would be the prudent thing to do. Relations between the king and his uncle had never been loving at the best of times, but lately they'd been downright poisonous. It probably didn't help that I struck the little ingrate. Tyrion reasoned. Though I could smile at the memory. If anyone needed a good beating, it was Joffrey. What can I do for you, beloved nephew? Tyrion asked, injecting as much warmth and servility into his voice as he could muster. Joffrey's handsome face screwed up in contempt. Don't give me your flowery words, uncle. I want to talk to you. Tyrion crossed his arms. Then by all means, your grace, talk away. You have my full attention. The two stared at each other for a long moment. From his position the king was at a disadvantage stood, as he was, far below Tyrion. Joffrey was evidently unwilling to mount the stairs to bring himself level with his hated uncle. Likewise, Tyrion had no desire to descend the steps. The further I am from this lunatic the better. Cersei seemed to be watching the unspoken contest with mounting unease. Her eyes were fixed on her son and seemed to be gauging his reaction to this apparent challenge to his authority. No doubt she believes that any insult to Joffrey is an insult to her. She always was quick to take insult where none is intended. It was Joffrey who broke first, his youthful impatience getting the better of him. I have heard that the Tyrells have declared against us. Against me. The boy's mouth was set in a thin line. Pycelle, you little worm. No doubt the aged Maester had gone straight from the small council meeting to tell Cersei who had told her bouncing baby boy. And now I have to deal with the little toddler as he throws his toys around in frustration. I should have kept that old fool in the black cells. Tyrion nodded slowly. They have indeed, your grace. No use lying just to salve his feelings. Joffrey seemed momentarily surprised by his uncle's simple statement. Quickly recovering, he glowered. And what are you going to do about it? Do? Tyrion asked in honest surprise. They have rebelled against their rightful king. Joffrey snarled, his hands curling into fists as he gripped them by his side. They must be punished. I want Mace Tyrell in chains and Highgarden burned to the ground. I command it. Tyrion couldn't help himself. A chuckle escaped his lips. The folly of youth, and the insane. Cersei, however, did not find the situation amusing. She glared furiously at her brother. You dare to laugh at your king? Her voice was as cold as ice. He glanced at her for a moment, undaunted, before returning his gaze to the king. Forgive me, your grace. I was remembering something I'd heard earlier. Never mind what you heard earlier. Joffrey had gone red with rage. Did you not hear my command? Tyrion nodded softly. I did indeed, your grace. He tilted his head as if considering. Perhaps you would so good as to tell me how I am to carry out such a worthy command. Joffrey was gripping his hands so tightly into fists that Tyrion wondered that he might draw blood. I want Mace Tyrell dead. The king shouted up at his uncle. I want House Tyrell obliterated, just like the Tarbecks were. I want. Pardon me, your grace. Tyrion interjected, raising a hand. Exactly how are we supposed to effect that? Joffrey stared for a moment as if struck dumb by what he considered as his uncle's stupidity. We have an army here. Sitting here eating all the food and taking our pay. Take them south and strike, make the rabble earn their keep. Cersei was smiling smugly up at him. No doubt this was all her idea. She can't do anything about the Starks or the Tully, so she's trying to engineer a war here in the south. All she had to do was wind Joffrey up and point him exactly where he was wont to go. Meanwhile Joffrey continued his rant. Send a message to the Martells. Tell them that they will support us in the campaign. He smiled in excitement. The army should be ready to march in 2 days. What a pair of idiots. And whom will defend the capital from your uncle Stannis? Tyrion asked, innocently. Joffrey scoffed. Uncle Stannis is milling about with no support. He doesn't have the numbers to assault King's Landing. Sir Jocelyn would disagree. Cersei looked mockingly at him. Sir Jocelyn is a jumped-up hedge knight with no military expertise. Says the woman who made Janos Slynt Lord of Harrenhal. Joffrey was practically beside himself with excitement. We will march as soon as we can. The Tyrells won't know what's hit them. He drew himself up to his full height. Uncle, issue the commands. No. The simple statement was like an act of throwing cold water over the king. Joffrey's face went white as he stared open-mouthed at his uncle. Cersei glowered at him. What did you say? She asked, in a mute whisper. Tyrion kept his face impassive. You heard me. His nephew stalked towards him, his face frozen with rage. He reached the stairs and began to ascend, his gaze never leaving his uncle. You will do as I command. I am the king. Time the boy got a grasp of who really has power here. Tyrion surprised them all by quickly walking down towards his nephew. They were now eye level with Tyrion standing but 2 steps above the taller man. His eyes bore into the king's. You have a throne because others defend it for you. You contribute nothing but a blood right. Beyond that you have nothing to offer but infantile ideas and juvenile posturing. How dare you? Joffrey seethed. He reached to point at Tyrion. I am the king. Tyrion slapped him hard. Joffrey, not expecting the blow, reeled. For a terrible moment it looked as if he might topple down the stairs, but, somehow, the king maintained his balance. Looks as if he inherited some from his natural father's ability. Joffrey stared at Tyrion in astonishment, his hand covering his reddening cheek. Cersei's voice rang out. My brother has assaulted the king, take him. No one in the hall moved. Behind him, Tyrion sensed movement. He briefly glanced over his shoulder to see Bronn and Sir Jocelyn making their way down the stairs towards him. Cersei looked about her, first to the Lannister guards, then to the gold cloaks who stood at the entrance to the Tower of the Hand. Finally she looked to the king's guards, who seemed to be the only ones willing to obey her commands. Even so, Sir Meryn and Sir Boros seemed deterred by the odds seemingly arrayed against them. Perhaps they know that Bronn could dispatch both of them without breaking a sweat. Tyrion glared at his sister. It is time you both realize that you do not command here. I have had my fill of dealing with your childish tantrums and ridiculous ideas. Joffrey backed down the stairs, reaching his mother and the scant safety of the Kingsguard. Cersei opened her mouth, but Tyrion spoke over her. The small force we have here, will remain here. We are not going to march an undisciplined force out to face the trained knights of either House Tyrell or Stannis Baratheon. No army we put in the field would last a fortnight against either Stannis or Randall Tarly. He crossed his arms. No, what men we have will protect us against the small folk within the city and any possible threat from outside. Though now that Mace Tyrell and Stannis Baratheon are on opposing sides, I doubt there will be much of a threat here for some time. A complete lie, but they don't need to know that. Besides himself with rage but having no choice but to back down, Joffrey turned on his heel and walked away. Determined to have the last word, he abruptly turned towards his uncle. One day I will have you killed for this, uncle. The last word he practically spat. Maybe. Tyrion smiled grimly. But not today. Chapter 19, Margaery 3. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. The doors before her were made of oak, heavy and imposing. Silent sentinels that had guarded the space within since the days before she was born. As she approached, Myra and Saya behind her, the doors swung open to admit her presence into the great hall of Riverrun. The scene that met Margaery was one of chaos. The hall was full of lords and knights, each voicing their opinions, clamoring to be heard against one another. Everywhere she looked, men were on their feet loudly protesting, some even hammering their fists into the long wooden table that occupied the center of the room and around which the assembled men were crowded. Margaery could see Robb stood in the middle of the table's long side, his shoulders hunched over a wide map of the region. He was lost in thought, mindless of the tumult that was raging around him. Like an island of tranquility in a storm or chaos. Maybe he is just so lost in thought he is oblivious to what's going on around him. She glanced to her left and spied Garland. Her brother was stood at a corner of the table, viewing proceedings. He seemed to be the only man not talking loudly or trying to get attention. No, that's not right. Roose Bolton is there at the other end. As quiet as the grave. Margaery shuddered as she made her way to her brother's side. She spoke into her ear, the better to make herself clear amongst the roar of noise deafening her. What has happened? Garland leaned into her, he spoke softly but with firm tones. The North has been attacked. She was stunned. By whom? Had Tywin Lannister beaten the Blackfish? Last she'd heard, Sir Brynden had been holding the right flank. Had the Lannister host at Harrenhal marched on him and put him to flight? No, surely not. Even if the Blackfish had been beaten, then the Lannister army would have had to pass the Twins and Moat Cailin before being able to attack the North. Besides, Lord Tywin would never be as foolish as to trap himself in the North. He'd be in hostile lands with no means of escape. The Ironborn. Garland said simply, by way of reply. Margaery's mind raced at the implications. Every citizen of the Reach knew to fear the Ironborn. The amply bounty of the Reach was a tempting target for the denizens of the Iron Island, all of whom seemed to live and die for pillage and plunder. Those who lived on the western coast of Westeros were always wary of raiding parties launched by Ambition's pirates intent on stealing whatever they could carry. I thought that the king had sent Theon Greyjoy to negotiate an alliance with his father, Margaery said in hushed whisper. Garland grimaced. Obviously, he was unsuccessful. Margaery turned her attention to the room. Now she understood why the lords present were in such an uproar. Most of the North's fighting men are in the Riverlands, some far in the west battling the Lannisters. While their backs have been turned fighting their king's war, their homes have been invaded. She noticed that not only were the Northmen shouting, the Riverlords were also on their feet, adding to the volume of noise in the room. Of course, they fear that the Northmen will abandon them and head home to deal with this new threat. The Riverlands will be exposed and vulnerable just as they are getting back on their feet. All that has been won in the last few months of warfare will be lost. Enough. The king's voice was firm, full of authority and command. Robb did not shout, he didn't need to, his authority was unquestioned in this hall. The noise quietened instantly, like fire quenched with water. The king lifted his head to survey the lords and knights assembled throughout the hall. His eyes found Margaery. She thought they softened briefly before hardening again as he continued to fix his principal bannerman with a fierce look. "Are we a pack of dogs, my lords?" the king said, softly. "To be so disorderly when confronted with bad news?" "Beg pardon, your grace." Wendell Manderly spoke quietly. "But the North has been attacked, would you have us take the news meekly?" The Great Jon slammed his hand down on the table, betrayed by that fucking Greyjoy. "No." Margaery could not believe it. Robb had trusted Theon implicitly. Believed in him enough to ignore all advice and dispatch him to the Iron Islands with the promise of peace. Whether Theon Greyjoy is involved in the attack isn't known. Maester Lewin spoke from Robb's side, his arms folded into his grey robes. "All that we know for certain, my lords, is that the Ironborn have launched an attack on the north. We must march immediately." Small Janumber roared. "The Ironborn will rue the day they set foot on northern soil." A cheer of agreement went up around the hall. Men, easily swayed by base emotions. Margaery could almost hear her grandmother's voice. "My lords." Lord Edmure placed both hands on the large wooden table. "I implore you to think. If our host turns north now, we'll lose the initiative. We have the Lannisters on the run." "Fuck the Lannisters!" the Great Jon yelled, his face a dark shade of crimson. "Our homes have been attacked, Tully." Lord Edmure bristled. "I know very well what it is to have my homelands threatened, Lord Umber." His eyes were haunted at the memory of recent events. "I share with you the feelings of powerlessness that comes with being able to do nothing while all you love is attacked by murderers and thieves." He turned in the direction of the king. "But surely, your grace," he implored, "the Lannisters remain the bigger threat." The silence that filled the hall was oppressive. Everyone turned to Robb Stark, who seemed to be staring vacantly at the map in front of him. Abruptly he looked up. "My sympathies, uncle, for all you have suffered," Robb said softly. "You, and all the Riverlands. But we must defend our homes." His words were met with a roar of approval. Several Northmen hammered the table. However, all noise was silenced by the Blackfish. Sir Brynden did not shout or cry, he merely stood from where he's been watching the council deliberations and addressed the king. "Your grace knows that if you leave the south then you'll have lost it. Perhaps for good. Lord Tywine is just waiting for an opportunity to strike from Harrenhal. Our forces are stretched between the Green Fork and the Golden Tooth, it will take time to gather them before heading north. When the forces attacking the Westerlands find out that the north has been attacked, we'll get them back in a hurry." The Great Jon snorted dismissively. "Your grace, please. Send word to Karstark and withdraw our forces from Lannister lands." "Karstark? I thought that Galbart Glover commandeered the North's western forces." Margaery had been studious in learning all the northern houses and commanders. She knew that command of the forces attacking the Lannister homelands had been split between Lord Rickard Karstark and Lord Glover. At least until the king returned to resume the campaign. "He did," Garland said, lowering his head, "but Lord Glover is dead." Margaery gasped. How? Garland turned to her. He was killed while leading a raiding party along the western coast. Stray arrow took him through the eye. Margaery gave an involuntary shudder. She knew that Glover had been a loyal bannerman to the Starks. Lady Catelyn had described him as a solid if unimaginative commander. That's not all. Garland's voice was mournful. Stephen Free is also dead. Even though he had never met the man, he genuinely seemed to be moved by their loss. Sir Stephen. Margaery tried to place him. Wasn't he the man who helped broker the deal between the king and House Free? Yes indeed. Garland nodded slightly. Apparently he took a wound at Oxcross and died a short while after the king left. The western host is in disarray. Of course when word reaches the northerners that their home has been attacked, they are bound to start marching eastwards. Margaery frowned. This was unwelcome news. If the Northern Army marched home to deal with the Ironborn threat, a course of action seemingly being advocated by the majority of the Northmen present, then it would present all kinds of problems in the south. Father will not have wanted to send Lord Randall all the way into the Westerlands only to find that the king we've sworn allegiance to isn't there to meet him. It's crucial that the Starks and Tyrells fight together. How better to cement an alliance? If Father sees that Robb has left the Riverlands, he will be furious. He could even end the alliance. Garland spoke again. We received all this news at dawn from that rider. He nodded to his left. Margaery could see a tall, broad-shouldered warrior standing rigidly at attention at one end of the table. His armor was dented, spattered with blood and grime. There was an emblem engraved on his breastplate, but through the dirt Margaery could not make it out. Even so, there is something terribly familiar about that man. Garland continued. The council was already due to meet to discuss this news, but then we received a raven from Winterfell that the Ironborn have attacked Torrens Square. As Garland finished, Margaery saw Robb nod at the Great Yon's words. He turned to the Blackfish. What say you to Lord Umber, Sir Brynden? The older man considered and then spoke. Your Grace, your army is already pushing hard in the west. It would be a tactical error to cease now. It gives your enemies respite. With support from our new allies in House Tyrell at this, the old knight nodded at Garland and Margaery. We can renew our campaign in the west. Maybe even siege Casterly Rock itself. With the Westerlands secure, we can march back, at full force, take Harrenhal and then send forces north to deal with the Ironborn. A ripple of anger swept the hall. They are not convinced. Casterly Rock has never fallen to a siege. Willis Marndaly, heir to White Harbour, pointed out. And even if we could accomplish that, it could take months, years even. Ways can be found to conquer any enemy. Sir Brynden said, persuasively, seemingly calling on his years of experience at warfare. He smiled. Remember, up until just recently, Lord Tywine was said to be unbeatable at war. Look at him now. Hiding like a child in the ruin of an old castle. There were nods around the table. Margaery marveled at the Blackfish's ability to speak to simple soldiers. He doesn't believe Lord Tywine is done, nor does anyone with common sense. He's playing to their egos. Let us finish the enemy in front of us, Your Grace. Edmure Tully spoke up. Let's not give Tywine Lannister a chance to recover. Without the Westerlands to support their cause, King Joffrey will stand alone. With the support of the Tyrells. I would remind my noble lord that the Tyrells have yet to enter the fight. Black Walder Free had spoken from opposite Edmure Tully. Indeed, we have not seen any sign of them since their small force arrived at Riverrun. Seems that the Free enmity towards us was not understated. Margaery spoke loudly and with as much steel as she could muster. Your Grace, I promise you, my father's army is on the move. Even now Lord Randall marches north to aid your conquest of the Riverlands. They'll arrive any day now. Any day. Black Walder sneered. More Tyrell promises. More words. Perhaps my lady forgets that words are wind. Margaery's hand shot down to clasp Garland's sword hilt to prevent him from drawing his weapon. Her brother's face, normally so genial and full of warmth and laughter, was clouded with indignant rage. Black Walder went on. It would seem that the Tyrells like the honors that go with war. Sir Garland being appointed to the king's personal guard, for example. But the actual fighting they leave to others. A titter of laughter went up from the assembled phrase. The Northman stared at the two Tyrells in stony silence. "Let me handle this," Margaery whispered into Garland's ear. She turned around to face Black Walder, who was smiling maliciously at her. "Gods, not for nothing is he called Black. His countenance is dark as his name suggests." "As I recall," she said, walking around the table, the other lords and knights moving back to let her pass, "my house offered our fealty to King Robb without conditions. We did not use the situation to further our own agenda." Margaery kept her eyes on Black Walder as she made her way towards him. "No fear. I will not be cowed by this little man. Not here, not in front of the king and his court." Margaery stopped before Black Walder. She looked into his cragged face. "If, sir, you would impugn the honor of my family, perhaps you would be good enough to look at your own family's actions first. I have heard some call them, oh, what was the word? Despicable." Her eyes shot sideways. Now the Northmen were looking angrily at the phrase. The memory of the toll they had tried to exact for crossing the Twins was a sore point amongst the army. Black Walder's smile disappeared. He scowled at Margaery's face. He looked as if he might strike her. Before he could speak, another Free stepped in. The man moved with a decided limp as he came to Black Walder's side and smiled slightly at her. "Forgive my relative, good lady," Lame Lothar said softly. "The death of our most beloved Stephen has grieved us all." "Beloved?" someone snorted from the back of the room. The sounds of disbelief echoed from behind Margaery. Lame Lothar's smile drooped slightly. "It is true there are a great many members of House Free," he said, addressing the whole at large. "Our family is blessed in that regard. We are well aware of it. However, that just means we feel the loss of one of our own all the more keenly. Surely there are few in the room who would make light of a relative's death." "Nicely done, clearly your mind's nimbleness makes up for your body's infirmity." Margaery smiled sympathetically at both Freys. Her hands went to their shoulders. "No offense was taken, good sirs. I grieve for your loss." Lame Lothar nodded in thanks. "There is little else he can do." Black Walder looked as if he would dearly have liked to run her through, but he stayed rooted to the spot. Margaery smiled sweetly at them both and then turned her attention to the king. She spoke directly to him as she made her way to his side. "Your Grace, I promise you my father's army is on its way. When it arrives it will be ready and willing to fight. And if," she quickly cast a look around the table, "you feel it best to leave the Westerlands to secure your home, then House Tyrell will either fight the Lannisters here or march north to defeat the Ironborn. Your Grace's wish is our command, we live only to serve the crown." At this she dropped to one knee in front of the king. She looked up into Robb's eyes. "I swear it by the old gods and the new." The king looked at her for a moment. He reached down and raised her to feet. "There is no need for that, my lady. No one here doubts the loyalty of your house." "Oh, sweet Robb, that is not even close to being true." Margaery inclined her head dutifully. Robb turned back towards the table. "Have our scouts reported? Do we know where the Tyrell army is?" "No, your grace," Edmure Tully said, his voice tinged with bitterness. "There has been no sighting. My father's letter announcing Lord Tully's departure from Bitterbridge arrived a week ago." Garland said, still from opposite Robb. "Randall Tully is a fierce general, by now he should be nearing Silverhill, the southern border of the Westerlands." Margaery heard Robb say quietly. "The others take Silverhill," Sir Helman Tallheart said, his face full of anguish. "What of the north?" "Of course, Torrens Square is the seat of House Tallheart. They have the most to fear from an invasion." Willys Mandaily shifted uneasily. "Perhaps then we can reach a compromise." He looked at the map. "If House Tyrell's army is potentially so close, we can let Lord Randall and the Riverlords to deal with the Lannisters here while we head north to deal with the Ironborn." There was a chorus of agreement. Even the Riverlords looked placated at the prospect of having a sizable force replace the one that may soon be leaving. The Blackfish spoke up. "And what of Lord Tywin's force at Harrenhal? At the moment they are bottled up, but if we pull forces north then they'll break out to the east and take Lord Randall unprepared." The room paused, considering. Sir Helman spoke up again. "We must defend the north, your grace. by now even Winterfell may be threatened. Robb's face reflected his inner turmoil. Tactically it makes sense to finish the Lannisters here and now, but the emotional, northern choice, was to turn round and savage those who threatened your home. Margaery sensed that the crucial decision point of the meeting had arrived that, for better or worse, may well define Robb's reign. The gathering stopped and seemed to wait with bated breath for the king to make his decision. A voice spoke into the silence. "Forgive me, your grace, but there is another way." The lords and knights turned to the speaker. Roose Bolton looking unperturbed, not a flicker of emotion stirring on his face as he addressed the king. Robb looked curiously at the Lord Bolton. "Please, speak, my lord. We are Northerners. It is our nature to defend our own." Lord Bolton spoke softly, almost whispering. "But it is folly to ride north to fight those curs who attack our home in what could just be a small raid. We would lose everything we have gained." Robb looked angry. "A king who cannot defend his home is no king at all." Roose Bolton's gaze did not waver. He merely regarded Robb with his cold, dead eyes. "Just so, your grace, but it is precisely because you are a king that you should remember that you do not have to do everything yourself. Allow me to write to my bastard at the Dread Fort. He can raise a force that will secure Winterfell and reinforce Torrhen's Square. Our lands are the least threatened by Ironborn raids. We can easily spare the men. It will be my bastard's pleasure to run the invaders to ground." Margaery looked around. Oddly, for a group that seemed to love shouting, the Northerners seemed to have respect for Roose Bolton despite his quiet tones. His solution may prove to be the most sensible, she thought. She looked at Robb. He seemed to be thinking through his options. Margaery looked down and saw that the king's closest hand was shaking. Abruptly Robb seemed to realize it too and placed it firmly on the table, as if to steady himself. Margaery yearned to support the young man who was now faced with an unbearable choice. She leaned in and, as subtly as she could, placed her hand on top of the king's, trying to offer as much comfort as she could. Suddenly, as if acting on its own accord, Robb's hand rotated and he grasped Margaery's fingers in his. The action shocked her. Should he be doing that here, before them all? A week ago should have been delighted that he was showing a need for her in front of all the others. But right now it might make him seem weak when most he needed to appear strong. Regardless, her heart leapt. "I don't care if others see." Margaery dared to glance at the king only to find that he was looking down at the table with his eyes closed. She felt Robb lightly squeeze her hand again as if gathering strength before he looked up sharply. His face set, his eyes clear. "Very well, Lord Bolton. Make the arrangements." The meeting adjourned shortly afterwards. There had been some protest, but the king had been unwavering in his decision. As the council members filed out of the hall, Margaery could not help smiling to herself. Despite the precarious situation they were in, the meeting had proven one thing: Robb Stark was a leader who could make his men follow a course of action that they really didn't want to follow. What's more, he is a leader who is not afraid to draw on a woman for support. As Margaery left the hall, bound for her chambers, Myra and Saya following close behind, she heard a voice. "Myra." The three women turned. Standing to one side of the corridor was the rider. The man clad in armor who had delivered the news from the west. His scraggy beard and disheveled appearance belied the fact that this man was far younger than Margaery had initially thought. "Rodrik." Myra breathed, as if not quite believing the sight of the man in front of her. A flash of understanding hit Margaery. Standing closer now, she could see that the symbol engraved on the warrior's armor was that of a black tree with a small white sword in the trunk. The sigil of House Forrester. Myra's house. Now I understand why the man looked so familiar. "Sweet sister." The man stepped forward and threw his arms around Margaery's handmaiden. He pulled her into him as they embraced fiercely. "Iron from ice, little sister." Rodrik whispered into his sister's hair. "Iron from ice, big brother." Myra replied, hugging him tightly. Margaery cleared her throat politely. Myra sprang back from the embrace, her face reddening. "Forgive me, my lady, The girl glanced down at her dress, now stained with the dirt of her brother's armor. Pretending she hadn't heard their quick exchange, Margaery put on a severe expression. "Where are you, courtesies, Myra? I would know who this man is, especially when he has the impertinence to touch one of my handmaidens. Roderick Forrester started to speak, but his sister cut across him. Please forgive us, my lady. This is my brother, Roderick, heir to Ironroth. Roderick, this is Lady Margaery of House Tyrell. Roderick bowed. It is an honor to meet you, my lady. Keeping her voice cold, Margaery turned to address Roderick. It is a pleasure to meet you, Sir Roderick. Myra is often telling the other ladies of court how magical Ironroth is. Roderick smiled indulgently at Myra. I have often thought that mere words are insufficient to describe our home, my lady. But if any words could do to the deed, then it would be Myra who could find them. Myra looked torn between abject embarrassment and her joy at her brother's praise. Please forgive me, my lady, I was just so excited to see Roderick again. I completely forgot myself. Margaery's face broke into a wide smile. There is nothing to forgive, Myra. You are excused today's duties. Go spend time with your brother. Myra's eyes widened disbelievingly. She knelt before her mistress. Thank you, my lady. Margaery laughed. Go now, she chuckled. Before I change my mind. Smiling in gratitude, Myra gestured to her brother, who drew himself up, bowed deeply to Margaery, and then followed his sister down a corridor that would lead to the courtyard. Saya stepped up behind Margaery. That was very generous, lady. Margaery continued to walk towards her chambers. Life is too short, Saya. One should try and be happy while we can. Gods know there may not be many joyous times ahead. Chapter 20, Rob 2. Chapter text. The candles flickered around the table, casting shards of light around the hall. Still the darkness remained. For the last hour or more the hearth fire had begun to slowly die, guttering out as the servants no longer refueled it. As the fire died, the oppressive darkness grew ever more pervasive. The king paid it no mind. His attention was elsewhere. Earlier in the day the long hall had been full of men jostling for position, clamoring to make themselves heard around the long table that contained the large map of the 7 kingdoms. The map was long, stretching over the center of the table. While the king's focus used to be on the center of the realm, around the Westerlands and Riverlands, what with Highgarden, the Stormlands and now the North in play, he now had to expand his overall planning to encompass almost all of the 7 kingdoms. Maybe that is what it is to be king. One has to look over the whole realm, not just your little preferred corner of it. He smiled ruefully at his naivety. He once believed that the North could carve out its own kingdom, independent of the South and its dirty political games. With Robert Baratheon dead and the Lannisters in control, there seemed no point in a protracted war to win a land in which Rob's people had no interest. And certainly not one to put me on the Iron Throne. Gods be good, I have no interest in being a king of 1 kingdom, much less 7. Still, he mused, it made no difference now. That may have been his thoughts at the start, but they were way past that now. With the arrival of the Tyrells and their bending the knee to him, things were very different. A few months ago he thought to be the ruler of the North and Riverlands, and even that he considered to be the height of vaulting ambition. King of the North. Laughable. Yet, now he had the reach at his command. Well. Yet another responsibility to tie round his neck. Even more weight to hold him down. Father, wherever you are, you must think I've become something out of a mummer's farce. The smile dropped from his face. Father, sisters, where are you? Safe. Unharmed. Or dead in a ditch somewhere in the vast wilderness between King's Landing and Riverrun. There was no way to know for sure. We may never know what happened to them. Rob shook his head, as if to shake such mournful thoughts from his head, and surveyed the map again. Whilst he never asked for this responsibility, it was, nevertheless, his. And Starks do their duty. Father would expect no less of me. The map was populated by small wooden blocks that represented the disposition of the forces currently at his disposal. The blocks were shaped to help him distinguish what was an infantry or cavalry unit. Furthermore, the blocks had the house sigil of whichever house was responsible for raising and maintaining it. When it had just been the northern forces, Rob and thought this little quirk absurd. We are all Northmen, there is no need to divide us unnecessarily. However, experience had taught him a thing or two. Whilst he had always been proud to be a Stark, he had not appreciated the pride others had in belonging to their houses and the history that came with it. Half the houses under his command had issues with the other half. Some problems were just minor disagreements, some could erupt into bloodshed at any time. It was a continual headache. And this problem was compounded by the joining of the River Lords to their ranks. I wonder if the Tyrell ranks are as acrimonious. The vast majority of blocks on the map were clustered in several key places. To the east of Riverrun there was the Blackfishers command by the Green Fork, currently under the command of Gregor Forrester, who was checking any attempt by the Lannisters to head north. There was the garrison at Riverrun, headed by Ed Muirtully, who was in charge of reclaiming the Riverlands, a role that was almost complete due to Robb's successes in beating back first Sir James Host and then defeating the reserve Lannister force at Oxcross. Finally there was the Western forces, which had initially been raiding the Westerlands. Now the force was based at the Golden Tooth. Rickard Karstark had pulled the force back after Galbert Glover's death and was awaiting orders. Robb knew this to be temporary. Lord Karstark's initial caution at the death of his friend would soon be overridden by his desire for revenge over his son's deaths. A revenge that would only be completed by the destruction of the Lannisters. Robb would not have given command to Rickard Karstark had he had a choice at the time. When his presence had been requested by his mother, he had left joint command of the Western forces to Lords Karstark, Glover and Stephen Free. With the latter two deaths, Robb knew it was only a matter of time before hostilities resumed. And I need to be there when they do. He knew that Karstark would not wait long at the Golden Tooth. Even the threat to the north would not deter him from continuing to march westwards. It would be easy for the enemy to set ambushes for a man who suffers from such an all-consuming passion. But then am I any different? I started a war over the imprisonment of my father and sisters. Robb's eyes went south to when the map outlines the Reach, specifically Highgarden and Bitterbridge. Both places had large number of blocks by them, representing large armies. These had been set out by Maester Lewin after consultation with Garland Tyrell, who had dutifully furnished the Maester with reports and information detailing his father's forces. A third much larger block of Tyrell troops was in the open country between Bitterbridge and Silver. Randil Tarly is on the move, but who knows when he'll get here. Then there was the north. The place that Robb did not want to think about, but whose place on the map kept drawing his attention. By contrast to the rest of the map, the north had scant few blocks. Robb had practically emptied the region of fighting men when he pushed south to free his family from the clutches of the Lannisters. There were but two lone blocks. One at Winterfell with the direwolf of House Stark, and the other placed at Torrens Square, crudely carved with the squid sigil of House Greyjoy. On the face of it, any invasion from the Iron Islands would not trouble the north, even if the single block didn't truly represent the number of those attacking. Robb knew that, even if the whole Iron Islands emptied and attacked, the north was an unconquerable region by so small a force, and yet the damage the Ironborn could do would be phenomenal, both to the morale of his troops and the lives under Robb's care. Perhaps I erred in approving Roose Bolton's plan. Maybe I should have ordered part of the army north to deal with this threat. At the council meeting earlier, Robb had almost been persuaded by the Great Jon and Sir Talark to do just that. If the army went north, it could have decimated the Ironborn force. At the same time, the Riverlands would be left in a much better position to defend themselves than when Robb had arrived. The Lannisters would not be in a position to attack anyone, not after Oxcross. Plus there had been the hope that the Tyrell armies would soon arrive to take the Northmen's place. However, the Blackfish had spoken, and Robb had instantly known that his mother's uncle had the right of it. A king must be able to delegate and had a responsibility to all of his people, not just his home. He would not leave the Riverlands to be attacked by Tywin Lannister. They had suffered enough already. Nor would he countenance the arrival of House Tyrell's army to find the king they had sworn allegiance to had fled north. No, they will find their king directing this war from the front, as is my duty. The demands of honor mean I can do little else. Still, it was hard, very hard, to leave the fate of his homeland to others. Robb looked over the Westerlands. The trick was to end the campaign here quickly, finish the Lannisters in the west, take Casterly Rock, and then strike at both the Iron Islands and Harrenhal at the same time. He had the men now. He just had to use them in the right way. A noise distracted the young king. A side door to the Grethall had opened. It had been done subtly, but, in the silence that pervaded the room, it was easy to hear. "Who's there?" Rob's voice, though soft, carried in the white stone chamber. A light appeared in the door, seemingly levitating as it entered the door. Rob quickly discerned that the effect was merely that of someone carrying a large candle holder, a solitary flame bright against the darkness. In the night's gloom it had a dazzling effect. He looked above the small flames to make out the figure behind the light. It took but a moment for his eyes to adjust and he saw an exquisite face framed with long brown hair. As always when in her presence Rob felt his heartbeat begin to quicken. His throat grew dry. In any normal situation he found her a vision of loveliness, but here, with the candlelight dancing across her features, she looked as close to a goddess as he was ever likely to find. Margaery stepped further towards him. She wore a simple silk dress with a light shawl looped around her arms and behind her back. "I hope I'm not disturbing you, Your Grace." Her voice was soft and smooth. Rob smiled. "How did you arrive unannounced?" "I am supposed to have guards, my lady," he remarked. "A group of knights who are supposed to guard their king day and night." Margaery shuddered playfully. "Kingsguard?" she breathed, her voice adopting a scornful tone of mock terror. "I should not be surprised she was able to slip past any defenses put in place by my lords. Margaery has got past any barriers I had some time ago." "Can I do something for you, my lady?" the king asked, ever courteous. "I thought perhaps you would value some company. Today must have been very trying for you." He chuckled at the blatant understatement. "No one said being king would be easy, my lady. Though, I confess, that I was unprepared for how hard it would be." "You carry the weight well, Your Grace." Margaery set the candle holder down on the map table as she talked. Rob shook his head in denial. "I never wanted the crown. True, I could have refused it, but I was convinced it was best for the people that they were given a figurehead." His eyes drifted to the map and the area marked Winterfell. "If I had known then what it would have cost, I would have turned down my men when they hailed me king." His companion looked at him from where she stood at the table. "The realm would be poorer for it, Your Grace." "Perhaps." Rob allowed, lost in thought. "But I feel so unworthy of the responsibility placed upon me. I was raised to rule Winterfell and the North. Not to run multiple kingdoms and conduct wars based leagues apart. Doubtless I had initial successes." He paused. "Perhaps it was these that blinded me to the hardships that followed." Margaery regarded him for a moment. "You judge yourself unfairly, Your Grace. Aegon the Conqueror himself had setbacks." Rob's eyes snapped up to look at her in horror. "I am no Aegon the Conqueror." Margaery smiled softly. "I disagree, Your Grace. In some respects you are very much like him. He too was a young man who others misjudged due to his age and inexperience. The kings of Westeros laughed when he arrived in the realm claiming lordship over their domains, but within a short few years he had the crown." The horror in his eyes did not abate. "Aegon the Conqueror killed thousands. How many died as the kingdoms fought each other?" Margaery asked. "Aegon's war was costly, true, but it brought centuries of peace." Rob considered this, picking up one of the wooden blocks and inspecting it. "Perhaps the price was too high. I have no desire to impose my will on the people of this realm. I went to war to get my father and sisters back, not to conquer other realms." He turned to regard the map. "Things have spiraled out of what ability I had to control." Margaery nodded her slightly. "Indeed, Your Grace, but I once heard it said that the true test of a commander is to endure the whims of fate and strike on and win regardless." The king smiled grimly at her. "Were these wise words from your father? I can't imagine what terrible whim of fate Mace Tyrell had to endure while sitting in the sunny, warm enclosure of Highgarden." His visitor smiled widely and uttered a small laugh. "Oh, no, Your Grace. Between us, my father isn't known for words of wisdom when facing adversity. Those particular words were uttered by Randil Tarly." Margaery tilted her head to one side seductively. "If it helps, for my part, I believe that you are a wonderful king." He regarded her with surprise. "How so, my lady?" The girl stared him straight in the eye. "You have something else in common with Aegon. He once said a king should never sit easy. The king snorted. "I have heard that saying as well. Though I heard it was the result of the discomfort of sitting the Iron Throne and its metaphor for fearing rebellion and assassination." Margaery laughed. Gods, I love that sound. Very true, your grace, but allow me to extend the metaphor. You will not sit easy on your throne either. Not because you're hated and fear rebellion or assassination, but because you will always strive to do your best for the people whom you serve. Whatever you accomplish will never be enough. If you help or save one life, you will always think about what else you could have done, how else you could have helped, or how many more you should have saved. True enough. My father once told me that being a lord was very like being a father. He sighed and paused at the pain of the memory. Instead of just 1 or 2 children though, you have thousands and you worry over each and every one of them. Constantly. The fear ever present that you will fail in your duty and let them down. There is no fear of that. The lady before him said in a certain tone. Not with you. Such capacity for caring is a trait most worthy in a king. Margaery said as she leaned over the side of the table, reaching to play with a few blocks representing King's Landing. Her hip seductively followed the curve of the table. Robb had to stop himself from staring. To be perpetually preoccupied, she went on, with the welfare of your people is something that few kings have had before you. Robb looked back at the section of the map representing the north. I feel unworthy of the responsibility, he admitted quietly. Margaery pushed herself up and walked slowly towards him, her finger trailing idly across the map table as she moved. That would seem to be at odds with your defeat of Jaime Lannister and victory at Ox Cross. The Robb Stark on show there was brave, dashing, bold, and yet with touch of recklessness about him. The very model of a leader. She stopped before him, taking his large calloused hands in hers. Where does this doubt now come from? You had none of it at council today. Oh, if only she knew. Leading men in battle and running a kingdom are not the same thing. Robb pointed out. Very true, your grace. But talk to the people of Riverrun and you will see how you are loved. My grandmother once told me that if you give your love to the people, they will return it 1,000-fold. The proof of that is right here in the town. The small folk adore you. At this she shyly looked up at him as she took his hands in hers. As do I. She finished quietly. The scent of her perfume overwhelmed his senses. He brought her hands up to his lips and lightly kissed the back of her hand. They gazed at each other for a moment. After a long pause the king found his voice. Thank you, my lady. His voice was harsh, just a touch above a whisper. For your belief. He finished lamely. Always, my king. Margaery's voice and face were filled with sincerity. Robb swallowed hard. He found himself becoming entranced in her large brown eyes. She is beyond beautiful. He tore his eyes away to scrutinize the map. He cleared his throat. I shall need that belief in the battle ahead. Seeing that he was preoccupied by the map, Margaery sighed. She shook her head and gave him a look of disbelief. It lasted but an instant though. She took a small step back before asking. You are a warrior, your grace, bred from a line of warriors. What do you command we should do? Robb looked at her. He saw a young woman of surpassing intellect. A person he desperately wanted to impress. Thankfully, here he was on safer ground. He turned to the map. I shall ride from Riverrun in the next few days. As soon as the troops can be readied. Margaery slid in behind him and spoke over her shoulder. Will you head north, your grace? No, he said firmly. I shall take the northern forces and ride west. Pointing to a spot on the map, he said bluntly. We will be bound for the Golden Tooth. You mean to reinforce Lord Karstark? Margaery asked as she walked around the table, her eyes on the map. Robb laughed mirthlessly. Oh, I mean to do more than that, my lady. Once our forces are joined, I mean to move west. He traced a finger across the map. There are a number of towns between the Riverlands and Casterly Rock. I mean to take them all. Margaery studied the map, then looked up. You mean to assault Casterly Rock? The king's eyes flashed. In time. First I have to draw any Lannister reserves in the Westerlands north. He picked up a few blocks with a lion crest engraved on them. He set them on the map around Casterly Rock. We know there are a number of troops garrisoned at Lannisport and Casterly Rock, but we are uncertain of numbers. However, when my northern force strike, we shall draw them north to engage the threat. He pushed the Lannister figurines towards his own group. Margaery did not take her eyes from his face. What then? Robb smiled ruefully. Then your father's army comes into play. He pushed the Tyrell force nearing Silverhill directly into the heart of the Westerlands. By the time the Lannisters will know what's happened, their major towns will be sieged or taken and their forces surrounded. Robb finished his demonstration by encircling the Lannister blocks with his own army to the north and the Tyrells to the south. His companion nodded. She tilted her head. Why only take the northern forces? The king's smile was shallow. The attack by the Ironborn has dismayed my forces. I need to engage them in a battle now. A battle they can win. They need to go west to put an end to the Lannister forces there. With your father's help it should be relatively easy. I have already sent riders to find Lord Randall to inform him of my plans and ask for his support. But why not use the Riverlords? Margaery asked, seemingly curious. Surely the more men you have the quicker it will be over. Come now my lady, I know you are no fool. Tywin Lannister sits to the southeast. He still commands a large disciplined army. He must be kept exactly where he is, until the west is dealt with. I will leave the Riverlords to complete the liberation of their home and protect our rear as we go to deprive Tywin Lannister of the only thing he cares about. His home and legacy. Who will command here? Margaery asked. The Great Jon. I shall take the Great Jon, the Mandaelis and the Talarts with me. Robb said firmly. Blackfish and Roose Bolton will head back to the northern force based by the Green Fork. They will keep the Northmen in line long enough for us to finish our business in the west. He smiled again. It will have the added bonus of not only keeping Tywin Lannister pinned where he is but means that Lord Bolton could lead a force north if his son needs support in fighting the Ironborn. Finally, the king said, pointing to their current position on the map. My uncle will command here at Riverrun. She looked at him shrewdly. You never had any intention of heading back north? It was not a question. Not straight away. Robb admitted. He spoke without hesitation. If I marched my army north to fight the Ironborn I would never convince them to abandon their homes and march south again. He glanced at the map. Better we beat the Lannisters now, while they are on their knees, then allow them to get back up. My father gave me another piece of advice, never start a fight. But always finish it. Margaery finished with a wry smile. She paused, nodding. Of course, she said slowly, you will take your personal guard with you into combat. He nodded. Naturally. They are some of the best fighters I have. He saw her expression falter, the hint of fear behind her gaze. You need not fear for your brother, he will be by my side, the men of my guard will protect him as they would me. She smiled bravely. I know your grace, but Garlan has never been near an actual battle. Robb returned her smile. Neither had I until a few months ago. I promise you, while there is breath in my body, no harm will come to your brother. Margaery seemed to relax a little at that. She stepped in. I confess your grace, I shall miss you when you're away. There it was, the quickening of the heartbeat, the tightness of the chest. And I will miss you, my lady. She placed her hands on his chest. Without thinking his hands circled her waist. Her doe eyes looked up at him. I dread to think what would happen if you were hurt. She swallowed hard, or killed. Robb's right hand came up to brush her cheek. Do not worry, my lady. He brushed a stray strand of her long hair away from her cheek. I will not insult you by saying that I will be safe. War is a perilous business. But I vow, I will do everything in my power to win this war. I will return to my family. He paused, drinking in the sight of her. To you. And then she was on him. One moment he was gazing at her perfect face, taking in her features, the next her hands had gone round his neck and she had pulled herself upwards towards him. Their lips met. For the briefest of seconds his shock gave him pause, but then desire took over and he embraced her, allowing his lips to merge with hers. Their kiss deepened, weeks of repressed feelings taking over. Robb couldn't help himself. He lifted her onto the map table, issuing a slight prayer to the old gods that it would hold their weight. She wriggled backwards slightly, but their hips were not at a level. He could feel the heat of her. It would be so easy. He kissed down the side of her cheek until he reached her neck. Margaery moaned in appreciation. The moan shook Rob from his fog of lust. He looked at the girl in front of him, willing and eager. This is wrong. We can't. His voice was hoarse, thick with frustrated desire. Margaery looked at him in frustration. We can, Your Grace. There is no one else here. She leaned forward, one arm circling his neck, the other dipping down towards his breeches. No. He breathed, his hands grasped hers and he looked into her eyes. He saw the hurt there. Do you not want to? Margaery asked. Do you not want me? Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. More than life itself. Gods be good. I want you more than anything, my lady. Rob said, firmly. Praying that she could read the truth of that statement in his eyes. Why then? She looked confused. Her eyes began to brim with tears. He enclosed her hands in his and pulled them to his chest so that they were close to his heart. If we did, my lady, and we had this night, what would happen if I should fall in battle? You would be dishonored and the man who was responsible would be dead. I don't care about that. Margaery looked imploringly at him. The fiercest winter snow would melt at that look. As you say, after tomorrow, we may never see each other again. This may be all the time we ever have. The thought was a harrowing one. It was something he'd been considering for some time. Rob was acutely aware that anything happened to him the war effort would be severely hampered. Who would take my place? If I die, would everything I've fought for be lost? What do I leave behind? Am I a good man? These questions often plagued men in war. What really struck Rob was that, without him the Tyrells would most likely end the alliance and go home. He knew that his mother was right, Mace Tyrell wanted to marry his daughter to him to seal an alliance. Despite his boyish reaction to the girl before him, he could see clearly enough for that. Yet in the time we've had together, I find myself falling for Margaery Tyrell despite the fact that it is obviously the Tyrell intention all along. It wasn't, Rob reflected, just the fact that she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, but also that she was kind, clever and wise. Far more than I will ever be. He looked at her. I could be dead a week from now. Others take me, I could be dead tomorrow. She looked at him. Your reign has been marked by your boldness, Your Grace. Be bold now. Take what you want. The thought cleared his mind. It was like a ray of sunshine on a stormy day. Life is too short for doubt or regret. In an instant his course of action was clear. He knelt before the table. Lady Margaery, the Rose of House Tyrell. Will you do me the honor of marrying me? Margaery stared at him, no doubt struck speechless. A moment passed. An eternity in Rob's opinion. She leaned in and hugged him to her. Oh, Rob, my love. She whispered into his ear. Yes. Of course I will. The wedding took place the following day. Rob was concerned that a day's notice was insufficient to prepare for a royal wedding, but Margaery handled everything. You will ride off to battle in just a few days. She said soothingly. I want to be your wife when you do. Nothing will prevent that. The castle had been rocked by the news that King Robb Stark was to marry Lady Margaery Tyrell. There were few who were not surprised. Catelyn Stark had merely smiled when told the news by her son. The Blackfish had laughed and gone off to drink his grandnephew's health. Garland had acted surprised, delighted of course, but surprised all the same. Black Walder Frey's reaction had been a shock. When Robb announced his nuptials that morning in council, the man had angrily stood and claimed the king was reneging on a deal between their two houses. Catelyn Stark had replied that no marriage contract was arranged, just that Robb was obligated to consider a marriage pact with House Frey. This had not placated Black Walder, who had stalked from the council chamber in anger. Lame Lothar had apologized for his relative but added that this marriage would be a great disappointment to their grandsire. The incident cast a dark mark over the morning's preparations. The ceremony took place in the September of Riverrun. Some of the northern lords had been outraged that their king was to marry as a Southron rather than as the northerner he was. Robb had faced this outrage head-on. He stood at the head of the table as the Great Yon thundered about ancient rites and traditions until he could bear it no longer. He had turned and faced the Great Yon. A marriage in a September is in following with the traditions of Lady Margaery's family and house. I will honor her by abiding by them. Besides, his eyes swept the men arrayed before him. My father married my mother here, and if it was good enough for him, it is more than good enough for me. That ended the discussion. Rob wore his finest clothes. Brown tunic and leather riding trousers. Margary's handmaidens had customized one of her white silk dresses to serve as a bridal gown. They had worked through the night, and even though they must have been exhausted, Myra and Saya walked behind Margary carrying the train of her dress as Garland, resplendent in green silk, escorted her to the September's altar. They spoke the words before Riverrun Septon, the same man who married Caitlin and Lysa Tully to Eddard Stark and Jon Arryn. The man had tears in his eyes as the young couple completed their vows and walked, hand in hand, from the chamber. The celebrations took place in Riverrun's great hall. Long tables had been set up, in similar arrangements to feast days. On the head table sat Rob, Margary and their principal guests. For Rob the following feast passed in a blur. He would vaguely remember the food and entertainment which, even though Riverrun's servants had not had any time to prepare, served its purpose. He later recalled the long line of lords and ladies who came forward to pledge allegiance to their new queen and reaffirm their loyalty to him and his house. Throughout the festivities Rob could feel a mounting sense of tension and anxiety. He knew that the evening had to culminate with something that, on the one hand he greatly desired and had been wanting for a while, and yet on the other he was terribly concerned about. He had no idea how it would go. He wanted to be a good husband, and lover, to his new wife. As the feast began to wind down, a lot of the lords began to look to him for a signal for the traditional bedding ceremony to begin. Rob saw several men casting lascivious looks as his bride, and a flash of anger went through him. No doubt they can't wait to see her naked as they drag her from the room and deposit her in my bed. They are going to be disappointed. Rob abruptly stood from his place at the center of the high table. "My lords," he called out. The music abruptly cut out. He smiled at the whole as he addressed his guests. "The Queen and I are grateful you could be with us today. My heartfelt thanks to you all for gathering on such short notice. But it has been a long day and there are many more ahead of us. I believe we will now retire to our chambers." A ripple of surprise went up from the gathering. Some looked like they may object to this denial of tradition, but no one said a word as Rob took Margary's hand and escorted her from the room. There are some advantages to being king after all. The walk to the royal bedchamber seemed to take forever, and yet no time at all. Rob and Margary attempted to engage in conversation, but as they neared the wooden doors conversation trailed off. For a moment they stared at the door, as if scared it might bite them. "Let me go in first," Margary whispered into Rob's ear. "Just for a moment." "Very well, my love," Rob answered, stepping aside and kissing her hand. Margary looked at him longingly as she stepped through the doorway, closing it lightly behind her. He stood alone for a moment in the corridor, with nothing but the flicking of torches for company. In the distance he heard Greywind howling from where he had been penned up in the kennels. Due to the formality of the event, Rob had decided it was best that Greywind was kept away from the festivities. He hadn't been happy about it, but it seemed for the best. "Am I mad?" Rob asked himself as he stood alone with his own thoughts. "This time yesterday I was planning a war. Now I am married to the daughter of an important ally. Not only am I a king and battle commander, I am now a husband as well." He didn't know which responsibility was the more daunting. "Rob." Margary's quiet voice, calling him into the room, awoke him from his reverie. Rob took a deep breath, placed a hand on the door handle, twisted it and entered. Dawn broke as Rob strode across the courtyard. His personal guard were arranged before him. He nodded at them and smiled as he mounted his horse. As soon as he'd mounted, the first group began to march, filing out of the castle gates in tight formation. Everywhere was activity, yet some people's attention seemed to be riveted to a balcony on which stood Margary, Edmure Tully and Caitlin Stark. It was clear that all of the attention was being focused on the people's new queen. Rob looked at his wife. She wore a dress of finest gold. Her hair was exquisitely arranged against her bare shoulders. Against the cold walls of Riverrun she looked distinctly out of place, vulnerable against the world. Her only defense was her courage, her fame, her incredible beauty. "Stop!" Rob commanded. Immediately, Small Janumber cried out the order. "Halt!" The lead contingent of soldiers had just pushed through Riverrun's walls, but they came to a stop at the command. Rob turned to address his wife who stood on the platform overlooking the procession. "My queen." He called up to her. Margaery failed to suppress a smile as she curtsied before him. "My king." She replied. How is it that her voice could be so soft and so clear at the same time? Were it as fragile as it seemed, he wouldn't be able to hear it at all. The illusion was tantalizing. Everything about her is tantalizing. "I regret that I must leave you so soon after our wedding day. But before I go, I must comment on how radiant you look, my lady." She came out of her curtsy, smiling broadly, and slightly spread her arms, showing the elaborate embroidery of her clothes. "Do you think so, your grace? I am unsure about the gown. It seems rather plain. Surely only the most hopeless of idiots could be provoked by it." Rob laughed. "The most hopeless of idiots are precisely the ones that worry me, my lady. Are we not, after all, going to do battle with the Lannisters?" Margaery tilted her head in a playful manner. "Be careful, your grace. I am a newly married woman and I do not believe my husband would be happy with the king flirting with his wife." He heard a rumble of laughter come from the troops behind him. His smile widened. "Is your husband a jealous man?" he asked. "Oh, I would never give my husband a reason to doubt me, your grace," Margaery replied, beaming at him. "But, even so, I wouldn't risk his ire if I was you. He is said to be a ferocious warrior." "Is that so?" "Oh, indeed, your grace. He has the blood of the North inside him." Rob nodded as if understanding. "Ah, of course, the North breeds them tough." Margaery nodded solemnly. "Indeed, my king, no one can beat them in battle. Though of course the realm is filled with those foolish enough to try." A cheer went up from the troops behind Rob. Margaery looked over the ranks of soldiers in the courtyard. She addressed them loudly. "Brave soldiers, of the North, of the Riverlands, of the Reach. Our hearts and prayers go with you. Your bravery and commitment to truth and justice is humbling. My husband and lord is a fortunate man to have such stalwart men behind him. Go now and bring justice to the realm." The responding cheer shook the courtyard. Rob turned in his saddle. "You heard the queen, men. Move out." On their commander's word, the men resumed their march through Riverrun's gates. A renewed purpose in their step. Rob wheeled his horse to face the balcony. He nodded in his mother's direction, smiled at his wife, mouthing "I love you," and then rode through the gates. Chapter 21, Davos 3. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. The boat cut through the water like a knife carving a cake. The sails, unfurled at the captain's orders, captured the powerful wind and pushed them forward at an unrelenting pace. Despite the bright sunny day, very little sunlight hit the ship, surrounded as it was by sister ships that accompanied the large vessel as it went about its business, the long shadows cast from their rigging crisscrossing across the deck until everywhere was covered in shade. Wherever he looked he saw men going about their work, grim determination etched on their weather-worn faces. The air was charged with the unsaid tension of men focused on a single goal, their course set on a single objective, King's Landing. From where we will either face victory or defeat. Only the gods know for certain. Gods still. Davos mentally chided himself for the slip. It wouldn't do to let the Red Woman and her supporters hear him make such a mistake. An utterance like that in their presence was likely to stir suspicion. And I have enough enemies in the king's court as it is. Davos cast his eyes to the sides of his ship. The fleet had left Storm's End 2 days ago. 200 ships, each one filled with soldiers from the Stormlands. A large fleet and army by any standards. He imagined the soldiers within preparing themselves for the arduous task ahead. Honing weapons, stringing bows, testing the flexibility of their armor. All in all a worthy fighting force. But that was not all, the smuggler thought. Even now the king moved with the rest of his army up towards the same destination as his fleet. Davos could imagine the drumbeat and the colorful banners of the knights and soldiers fluttering in the wind as the army trod the long road towards the capital. The same place we are bound. The fleet had been commanded to leave earlier than the army. Though the boats would move faster than the ponderous army, provided the wind was with them, they would need the extra time, having that much further to go. While the army only had to march a well-worn road to the city, the fleet would have to round Sharp Point and enter Blackwater Bay. "It is a good plan," the king has devised. Davos reflected, resting himself against the prow of the boat, his arms placed on the heavy piece of wood in front of him. Though I would have left more men at Storm's End. That particular argument had lasted long into the night. The king and his closest counselors had congregated in the tallest tower of Storm's End. The wind ripped through the windows, chilling them all to the bone as they huddled around a brazier for warmth. Only the king stood apart from the others. He stood by a window looking out at the narrow sea, his face unreadable and his thoughts very much his own. Sir Axel Florent had wanted to empty the Stormlands of troops for a full-on strike against King's Landing. Only with our full force, he had said, has a hope of breaching the city walls. Even with our full might, that may not be enough. His brother, Lord Alistair Florent, had muttered. Ever the soul of despair. Though Lord Florent would argue that he was merely being cautious. The city will fall. Sir Axel proclaimed defiantly. Davos knew that he had asked the king for command of the naval forces. No doubt he hopes that his willingness to fight will be rewarded, and of course the odds of his success will be increased, the more men he had. Though what reward does he think to gain from this? Alistair Florent is already the king's hand, and Stannis has shown no willingness to create his own version of the small council. What other role does Sir Axel aspire to have? Maybe he hopes that victory will allow him to surpass his brother in influence. Lord Alistair himself had looked mournfully at the king. Your Grace, this is folly. The walls of King's Landing have never been breached. Sir Axel turned on his older sibling. Give me the power of the Stormlands and we can take the city. Nothing and no one is unbeatable. Even the so-called mighty Tywin Lannister has been run ragged by Robb Stark. The king had turned to stare at Sir Axel. There was no emotion on his face, but Davos could see the eyes tighten, the teeth grinding behind the closed mouth. It was a mistake to mention the young wolf. His Grace is still enraged by his being declared king, and the face that too took almost half the 7 kingdoms with him. Davos had expected a stern rebuke from the king. However, he was surprised to find that it was not Stannis who spoke. Instead, Melisandre stepped forward, seemingly from the shadows at the side of the room. Like a nightmare from legend. King's Landing will fall, my king, she said, her voice calm and confident. It is yours. The Lord of Light decrees it. Perhaps the Lord of Light will be good enough to add his strength to ours. Sir Axel bowed his head at this. He turned back to the king as if expecting that this statement would end all discussion on the subject. However, Stannis was busy looking out of the window again, having returned to his silent vigil. Seemingly alone with his thoughts. For a moment nobody said anything. Sir Axel tried another approach. Your Grace. We must take the capital. It sounds almost like a whine. A child denied its favorite plaything. His brother looked over the fire at him, his face full of doubt. Sweat was beginning to appear on his forehead. Taking King's Landing, even if could be done, would doubtless cost hundreds of men. Besides, if we took the city we'd never hold it. He may well have a point. Boldness never won anything, dear uncle. This came from Sir Imry Florent, who had been lounging against a side wall. The court is full of damned Florents, each objectionable in their own way. Though none more so than Queenslis, a humorless doe woman. Sir Imry pushed himself off from the wall and walked to the brazier, looking bored with the debate. Lord Alistair frowned at the young man as he approached. Be quiet, Imry. What do you know of this kind of business? The young man ran a hand through his short-cropped beard. I confess not a great deal, uncle, but I know how to fight. I also know we will never win a war if we do not venture outside our castle. He looked around, laughing at his own jest before realizing that no one else found it amusing. He quickly fell silent. Alistair turned despairingly to the king. What of the Dornish? And the Tyrells? They threaten our flanks. If we take the army north we will be leaving Storm's End undefended. Your ancestral home could be taken, your Grace. The king did not respond, though he doubtless had heard. Sir Imry snorted by way of disagreement. Mace Tyrell couldn't take Storm's End the first time. He sat outside the walls during most of the rebellion. What makes you think he could take it now? His uncle hanged his head as if in pain. He said sadly. It is still a risk, your Grace. He looked up at the still figure by the window. I implore you to think, what does this venture gain us? By all accounts King's Landing is starving, discontent among the small folk is rife. What can it possibly gain us to fight for such a prize? He who holds King's Landing, holds the realm. Sir Axel stated firmly. Lord Alistair stared at his younger brother. He shook his head. That is not the case, your grace. Joffrey and House Lannister command in King's Landing. How much of a hold do they have over the realm? The Mad King controlled the city right up until the moment he lost the war, and his life. It is a city, that is all. Sir Zimri and Axel looked furiously at their elder relative, no doubt angered by this attempt by the Hand to steer them away from the planned campaign north. Suddenly Melisandre moved towards the king. She spoke in her usual deep, seductive voice. It is just a city, your grace. But it belongs to you. Though he would have denied it, King's Landing and the Red Keep were your brother's house. It has been defiled by traitors and usurpers. You suspect they murdered your brother, the rightful king. At the very least, the product of Cersei Lannister's incestuous union with her brother sits the throne. The throne that rightfully belongs to you. Would you allow such crimes to go unpunished? I'll give her this, the lady knows what motivates the king. The king looked at Melisandre, his face inscrutable. After a slight pause he directed his attention at the smuggler. What say you, Sir Davos? The others looked at him. He felt the weight of their expectation. Gods be good. I, your grace. Davos paused to consider. Your grace, the realm needs a leader. You are the rightful king. I am. Stannis said in a flat voice. It is just me, or he a little resentful of that fact. The king glared at him. I want your advice, not a basic assertion of a well-known fact. Well-known, maybe, but hardly accepted. Not by the people who you believe you have a right to rule. This being the case, it seems to me that you have to show your kingship. Stannis Baratheon's eyes bore into his. Go on. Seems to me, your grace. Davos shifted uneasily. That the small folk are simple people. They understand action. You've declared yourself king. To those on the street the king sits at King's Landing, ruling from the Red Keep. Not at a lord's castle. Exactly, my lord. Sir Axel said triumphantly. Davos said nothing. It's a rare thing that I, and any of the Florents, agree on something. The king shifted his gaze. He glanced out at Shipbreaker Bay. So you would support Sir Axel's plan to attack the city? Careful now. I know full well that is your notion to strike the capital. Why are you calling it Sir Axel's plan when it is plainly where you want to go? Davos was a simple man. Many years ago he promised to also speak truth to Stannis. This man who he now called king. He found me a nothing and made me a knight. I'll never play him false. I would, my lord. I do not believe that either Mace Tyrell or Doran Martell will attack Storm's End. It is a solid fortress with good walls and defenses. I believe those against us will do nothing but watch. Lord Alistair wasn't done. He stepped forward uneasily. Perhaps we could persuade the Tyrells to join us. Davos knew instantly that the Hand had made a mistake. The king rounded on him, his fury suppressed but still evident. I will not go begging to Mace Tyrell. The man is a cowardly opportunist. A cowardly opportunist with close to 100,000 men. No, Stannis continued as he turned to look at his small audience. I will not ally with that fat buffoon. He will bend the knee or be destroyed. The king paused to get control of his rage. When he spoke again his voice was measured. No, Sir Davos has the right of it. I will not allow the traitors and usurpers to sit in the capital and pretend to rule the realm. Stannis pointed to Lord Alistair. You, my lord, will remain here. I will leave a small garrison with you to protect Storm's End should it be attacked. You will have enough men and provisions to hold off any assault until we can intervene. Though I doubt one will come. Your grace. Alistair Florent went red, his lower lip trembled. You have appointed me to be your hand. My place is by your side. The king did not hesitate. Your place to wherever I decide it should be. He looked at the others. The rest of the army will march north. What of the fleet, your grace? Sir Axel asked. By the gods, sir, your ambition is on display for all to see. The king regarded him coldly. Sir Imry will command the fleet. They will sail up the coast, enter Blackwater Bay, and we'll hit the city on two fronts at once. Imry Florent couldn't resist shooting a smug look at his uncle. It will be an honor, your grace. I do not do it to honor you, Stannis said curtly. Do as I command and do it well. Victory will suffice. Sir Imry looked suitably chastised. He bowed and made to leave, but the king was not yet finished. He called after the young knight. And you will not be alone. Sir Davos and the Lady Melisandre will accompany you. The whole argument had been pointless. Davos thought to himself. The king had been determined to attack King's Landing from the beginning. Why did he make us partake in that mummers farce? Was Stannis unsure? Perhaps beginning to doubt himself. Until recently Davos would have laughed at the thought. The very notion that Stannis Baratheon would ever question his actions was simple laughable. But then something has changed since we were in the Reach. Something has given him pause. Maybe the death of his brother. The long ride back to Storm's End from their parley with Mace Tyrell had been arduous, but the king had driven them on. However, once back in Storm's End, a malaise seemed to have struck the king. The enforced pause while the power of the Stormlands gathered together had given him time to think. But about what? Davos shook his head to clear these thoughts. The answer would not rear its head from the seas and present itself to him on demand. He would either discover the answer to his question or he wouldn't. Right now he couldn't afford to be distracted. He had a battle to win. Notes. Thanks to all for leaving comments and giving kudos. I do so enjoy reading what people think of the story. A side note, one or two have mentioned that characters like Sansa and Jon Snow, plus fears that I have forgotten about Ned, have yet to show themselves. I promise you there is a plan and everything will unfold in time. I've had to do a lot of setup to get this far. I thank you all for your patience, but it was necessary. Chapter 22, Tyrion 4. Chapter text. The bells sounded throughout King's Landing, their ominous tone shattering the peacefulness that often came at dusk now that a curfew was in full effect. The inhabitants of the city thronged the streets, pushing this way and that, attempting to get home to their families and loved ones. I wish I were them. Sadly, I am already with my loved ones. Gods help me. As soon as the first bell had rung, informing the city of the encroaching enemy, Tyrion had issued commands that his generals and commanders assemble immediately and that the city be put into immediate readiness for a siege. The arrangements had long been in place for this, and Tyrion had been pleased to see his advisors and men spring into action at his word, carrying out well-rehearsed actions. Having set things in motion, he then retired to his chambers to allow Podrick Payne, his squire, to clothe him appropriately for the battle ahead. True, he could have done this in the council chambers. It would have saved time, and the effort of having to walk up those blasted stairs to his chambers, but he wanted to do this in private. He needed to gather his thoughts and have a moment of privacy. Within minutes Pod had joined him, dragging Tyrion's newly made armor with him. Then had begun the tedious and time-consuming process of fitting the armor. Surely it shouldn't have been that difficult. I'm not named Half-Man for nothing. The suit of armor was heavy. Much heavier than he had expected. While the weight was distributed across his back and shoulders, he still felt that once he stopped moving he would be anchored to the spot of whatever battlement he chose to stand on. Well, look on the bright side, at least I won't be able to run from the enemy. Tyrion cursed himself for not having given himself the time to wear the armor. He should have allowed time to get used to walking and moving in the heavy plate he found himself in. He had been lax, too lax in this regard. And now, he knew, he would come to regret it. In fairness though, I have been quite busy doing other, more important, things. It was true, he had been awfully busy lately. A hand of the king was never idle, or at least the good ones weren't. Tyrion had heard that Jon Arryn had somehow survived on just a few hours sleep a night, the penalty for running the realm whilst the king usurped spent all his time drinking or whoring. Small chance of Joffrey doing that, he's too busy torturing small animals. Yes, Tyrion reflected, the role of Hand of the King may be prestigious, some would say glamorous, but it certainly involved an awful lot of work. And that's not counting the fact that half the 7 kingdoms are in open rebellion and that half the people in the city below us would gleefully hang us by our entrails. Yes, things have been busy lately, plans don't just make themselves. It would be damn sight easier if they did. Though now, on the eve of battle, Tyrion was forced to face the possibility that all his planning may well have been for naught. Stannis Baratheon's army and navy were nearing the city. There was no more time to plan or scheme. A great battle was upon them. A battle they may well lose. Did I do all I could? Was there something else I haven't thought of? That thought was perhaps the most galling of all. Tyrion had oft believed in his superior intelligence, if for no other reason than it served as a counterbalance to the physical ailments